actually have like a mic up on stage. Okay. Yeah.
I think in the back there looked like there was a mic plug-in.
Here. Gotcha. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. That's cool. This is only just one after. I was, if it was already set that way, it was you could adjust the way. No. I just want to make sure everything was copacetic with you first being here, and we're getting ready. We're almost set up, ready to go. Love you too. Take care.
Okay. Yeah.
I will. We're gonna stay. Because all right. No, they used to. And when they did the internet, they pulled it off.
Okay.
Now, here's my question: as opposed to plugging things in there, oh, I can do that. I mean, I'll call Greg out, and then he might have something. You know, like almost like a Mr. Microphone.
Yeah, when I was in rowing, like when our boxes would go out in the boat,
Right.
we had like a fanny pack that was a speaker and a mic.
Yeah.
Which sounds, it worked. But I do not have that anymore. I looked for it last night. I sold it to Clemson.
Clemson?
Yeah, they're like our sister school for rowing. That's who we train with.
You did rowing?
Yeah, I went to Clemson for state.
Oh my goodness. I think Kara Jean did that for a little bit.
I loved it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, if they had a adult rowing team out here, I'd do it. No questions asked.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. The sound also might be better in here in general.
It's a better room, lower seat.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be better.
Could that move to the center between these two tables? That puts a little more dead center.
If I can get a plug, yes.
Okay. I'm concerned because you couldn't see the slides on the Facebook thing because of just the location of the camera. It's a little crooked, so.
Yeah. Good to me. I lived with Mike for 3 months. It's amazing that we still.
You still friends?
No, it's amazing. We're still learning about each other. All right, that looks good. If you wanna talk a second.
Sure. So this is me talking once again. I'm going to be talking. I guess I'll be doing a lot of talking. So let's talk. This is what talking sounds like when I talk. When I talk, I use words. Sometimes I use big words like onomatopoeia, my favorite Italian actress. Or sometimes I use smaller words like would. If that's an interrogatory term, it means like, I don't understand, could you please explain? So that's what it sounds like when I talk about talking with big words and small. I use both because you got to reach the little people too, and the really smart people, well, they don't need any talking. They already know everything, so they shouldn't really even be here. So I guess that's that for now. I hope I've talked enough.
You're good.
I'm very good.
All right, let's see. That sounds a lot better in here.
Yeah. You do.
Hey, can I call you back? I'm setting up the live stream for class. I'll call you on my way home. Yeah, I was just calling to see if everything went okay. I'll call you later. But yes, it'll be live streamed again. Now, of course, love you guys. All right, it looks good to me. Sounds a lot better. I probably have a rowing friend that in Raleigh that has one of those mic things. So if we can't, Greg said he can get it set up in the cafe. If he can't, then I'll grab one.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I started the AC, but it's still really hot.
We chairs.
Is there a turning on thing for the TV?
Yes.
This is very tenuous.
Oh yeah.
I mean, as long as nothing major happens, it will all.
We could flip one of these treasure chests on its side. Mike, there was a remote on one of these tables.
Remote. Remote right here.
That's it, yeah. Oh, we knew them.
Takes you out of your way.
Yeah, we will plug this in.
I'm gonna run up to the cafe real quick because get a little leftover ice from yesterday, ice chest. I think there's something else that we need to have. I got it. What about the tall chair that you kept backing into yesterday?
Yeah, that works.
That'd be good. I'll be right back.
Give me a hand with that?
Okay.
Yeah, hold on a second. Okay, that works.
Yep. It's set up for number 3. Are you gonna split screen again?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's showing your main screen. Just
Yeah,
so you know.
I have to activate it.
Yeah, just make sure.
how you feeling?
Okay. Oh, I'll have to run back and hang out with him. He still has a fever.
I was gonna, send you the screenshots from yesterday.
Yeah, did you take notes or did you?
I
have
did.
the PowerPoint?
I'm a terrible note taker, and I was trying to take notes, and I got some, and then he started going too fast, and I just said, forget it, and I just took pictures, screenshots.
Yeah.
So I'm sending you the screenshots if you want. I'll send you my notes too, but.
That would be really appreciated.
Gosh, I was hurrying up to get here, and now I'm the first one here.
Yeah, Mike and him went to go get a podium.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm good to go next week as long as, it doesn't get worse. Or anything.
Well, I mean, you could even sit and take the class, just not sit close to anybody.
Yeah, I just, caring for him is
Yeah,
the main.
number one. Okay, so what's going on with Sarah? I mean, not Sarah. What's his mom's name? Faith.
Oh, we had an intervention. Let me,
Because I was,
just for sake of privacy, let me mute this.
okay.
Well, I don't know how. Friday she was taken to Wilmington inpatient rehab. When we dropped her off, she was
Was she high or was she drunk or?
yes,
Both.
yes. She agreed to a Thursday night, packed. We had to shop for her because everything has to be closed when you get there, like toiletries. So she left with it was Stefan's birthday, and Stefan took her because they're the closest inpatient that takes medication.
Well, I hate to say it, but those kind of, well, let me just put it to you this way.
Yeah.
My ex-husband, I don't know if you ever met him.
No, I didn't.
Okay. He used to come to church sometimes. But he was in and out of rehab like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think I took him to like 5, over a period of 16 years of marriage.
Yeah.
But it's like they go in, they get clean, they come out, and the first thing they want to do is get something, from their old life. Like,
Well,
I got to get my car,
yeah.
I got to get my TV, I got to
Yeah.
get,
Well, she's been legally evicted from Bruce's, so she's not allowed back there. Because she can't go back there after she's back. She'd have to go to a shelter or have a place to live.
See, and I mean, she really needs to go somewhere where she's going to get, like, mentoring.
We've got her applications in at the women's shelter and at Family Promise. But Family Promise, she'd have to have a child, and she's not getting that. So, probably go to the women's shelter for a while until she can get her own place. But that's if she's gonna get there. So,
if she's gonna behave after she gets out.
But this place will keep her for as long as they think necessary.
I would
detox.
I would, and I don't know how Ron feels about this. I've talked about things like this before with him, and he's always really negative because he worries about me being home alone with someone else.
Yeah.
But I would almost be willing to let her come and stay in the bedroom that we have, but it would be really, really strict rules. Like if she gets a job, paycheck comes to me.
Yep.
Then I give her a certain amount of money, and I keep
Yeah.
a certain amount of her money for her.
Yeah.
And, you know, like,
If
and
she's
then,
gonna actually do it and be drug-free, I think she could do that.
yeah,
But
well, that's what I mean.
she lived with us, and because she wasn't drug or alcohol-free, she hated any rules. Like washing her own dishes, she flipped. So.
Well,
we'll
see,
have
I
to
mean,
see,
she would have all those kind of rules, like she would have to wash her own clothes, she would have to wash her dishes, she would have to, you know, like give me the paycheck, and I would give her money when she needs it, you know, but I would need to know what she's spending her money on too, because I would be very much, and I would be very much like, and one of the rules is you get up in the morning and we sit down and we have a devotion. Because I have devotion every morning, I read the Bible. So, you know, that would be part of her routine.
We'll
And
definitely pray about it, but I have a feeling we're gonna pray about it, but we'll see that, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, she can't live alone.
yeah, well, I mean, and if there was any kind of weird thing go on while she was with me, she'd have to leave.
Yeah, but she willingly went in.
Yeah. Well, Jesse did that many times too, so. I went through his thing for 16 years, so.
Yeah. We can leave voicemails, but we can't talk to her, so we don't really we get updates when something like that. Where are the other lights in here?
Should be up on stage, right behind there, yes. I think so that turned that one off though.
Yeah, the one right
Oh,
above
okay.
the stage is not allowing people to see the PowerPoint.
Bright lights, big city. Oh, that's good. That's off to the side.
You can read it better, but not great. Maybe I can push it more a little
Turn
bit.
off the fluorescence. See if maybe it might be too dark, but he's
That's too dark, right?
well, have a look on the screen. See if that reads better.
A little bit, not a ton.
Does it need to get closer maybe?
Yeah, I'm gonna get closer to the camera. All right, if you want to push this as I pull it.
Okay.
Better, but not great. Where's the glare coming from? Is it these?
Yeah,
I think
fluorescence.
Fluorescent.
How's that look?
It still has glare.
Is it that window right there?
It must be.
Wow, it's off to the side.
I think it's this window by the door over here.
We turn the fluorescence back on because it doesn't make any difference. See this? And that.
Oh, yeah.
It actually, the fluorescence,
Because what's happening is the camera is opening and closing.
yeah, lights back on would be actually better. That actually is kind of okay. There is a glare, but
You can't see the top part. You can see the bottom part. So I'm saying,
maybe even closer.
is there a way to point this down a little more so it's not, no, there really isn't.
It's still,
Because there's a lot of headroom there that.
But it's the actual, we'd almost have to tilt the TV forward to get that glare off there.
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of these incandescents. See the ones that are barely on up there, dimmer switches. Looks like a dimmer switch. Well, what's happening is the camera is compensating. That's why when the light goes
all
out,
right,
it
tell
actually
me if
works.
this is better.
That's definitely better, yeah.
A lot better.
Why is this stupid thing not going through? I don't know how to make it. Yeah.
Oh, I see what's happening. It's got these braces.
Yeah.
Okay, that's leaning forward now.
Okay, see if that feels better.
A little tenuous. It's a sort of brace. Mike, how's that look?
It looked a lot better. Tiny bit of glare down below, but
This is why I went to engineering school.
We play with blocks.
Yep.
This will hold it forward.
I need to roll it back
Yeah,
here.
perfect. Like, brace it from the back. Look how I got it over there. From underneath.
Hey,
We'll keep it leaning forward. Triangle in front keeps it from going far forward.
Babysitting dogs. You have to send pictures and tell them what's going on.
oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I imagine. I've heard about that.
Just don't bump anything.
I was actually looking at a TV stand.
Mhm.
They're not very much.
No, I can send you the one, because we move so often, we leave the TV stands where we move, and we've always used the same brand off Amazon, and it's not expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
But like a,
And it tilts, it goes like this.
but it's like not even wall mount. I mean, the
Oh.
one it's floor based and you
Oh,
can move
okay.
it anywhere.
Oh, that
and,
would be nice.
And it tilts and does all that stuff.
Yeah.
It just has feet that come out 18 inches
Yeah.
each side. Oh, so wait.
Definitely better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not perfect, but it's good.
Yeah.
And just press into it. I would keep this loading if you just go like leave it here. This needs to be cut off when we leave. This is not going to be out here, but it's just, and like, oh, and the remote side, that little trash can thing.
And do we have a link?
Oh, let me just say this for you. Vimeo link's always the same. Let me get the Facebook.
Well, Vimeo looks the same.
Vimeo's always going to be the same for the live. It'll pop up on Vimeo as a different. Vimeo's always going to be the same for the live. Yeah, if you're watching it live, it'll always be the same. But then when it goes to like the actual video, it will be different. And I can get all those for you.
That's you in that one.
Yeah, that should be you. It's just me sending the links for today.
It sends me.
Yep. Vimeo
Got it.
will always stay the same for live. Those are the Facebook. And
Working it right now.
okay. I just grabbed a tissue and threw it over there. Is I'll take a break.
All right.
thank you for everything again.
No problem.
Yeah, see the link on my screen, but I don't see the text. The HTTP.
Yeah, I think you should be able to just be able to forward it. Who you want to forward it to?
My wife.
Which one, Facebook, YouTube, or Vimeo?
YouTube.
Okay.
Because she doesn't have a Facebook thing with Robert. And then I got another one, my brother-in-law.
You can't get the network back here, can you? Okay.
Mike, can you
I'm getting it. I'll send it to her on Signal.
yeah, I guess so. But I need to send somebody on WhatsApp too.
I'll send it to both of you.
Okay. I can give you the WhatsApp number.
I think I just pulled it up. There's just the live chat. The man, the myth, the legend.
Always on time, man. You know that.
That's it. All good.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to read that screen. I mean, you can see it now without the alert, but the text is too small.
Right. Well, the only other option I can imagine is that we put that back on a chair and move this even closer. Well, no, this doesn't have to go. Yeah. It wouldn't. We put that on a chair, but then that cord gets tight.
Yeah, and that won't go very far.
Okay. Well,
But if you had an extension cord, just a regular old extension cord, you can take
let
this
me check.
forward another foot or two. Relatively easy.
Now I am sending you the link, the address, but it's going to populate like the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah. What I'll do is, how about this? And what I'll do is I'll go in here and break the link. And you'll have to separate it. I took the U2 apart.
Yeah.
Between the U and the period, you'll have to put that back together. Oh, that won't even do that. No, sorry. I'm almost gonna have to send it to him. Who, do you have it?
Is that it? Just that you go send it twice, because I can just copy and paste that.
That might have been it. Let me see here real quick.
YouTube/T0382.
That's what it showed up.
Yeah, that's it. I'll just copy and paste that. It's on that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right.
I think I can send it. Can I borrow you real quick, Mike?
Yeah.
I got photos and everything.
Why is it some phones you can send a text message to and have your cellular data off? And some phones, or some text people, their phone or something, you can't send it to them unless your cellular data is off.
Yeah, and there's where you have this MMS and SMS
Yeah.
messaging. One goes over the internet for the phone, the other one goes over the phone.
Well, I don't like using my internet because I don't have a big plan on it, so I turn it off all the time. I'm a penny pincher.
I'm a penny pincher.
I think my husband's gonna probably need to have the bigger plan than I do. We're switching him over. He's paying like $84 a month for his plan.
Yeah.
And that's just the service, you know? It doesn't include any taxes or anything like that. You know, and it's just like, I looked at it the other day and I said, okay, this is done. You're coming to my carrier. $14 a month. You get unlimited talk and text. And your data is one gig. You get 1 gig.
Yeah, 1 gig. Unlimited.
Well, I know, most people use like 4 or less, less. Some people don't use much, but I usually get along fine with the 1 gig. The only time I don't is if I'm going somewhere and I'm using the map service. And most of the people that text me don't text me on it, over the web. They text through SMS.
Jackie asked me to send you this link to the class for today. Period. Jackie asked me to send you this link for the class that I'm teaching today.
Are we supposed to select that link that Sam sent us?
Well, we can, or we can share it because we're live.
Oh, okay, so it's gonna be on there then.
Yes.
It's just so that we have it.
This is not Memorex, this is live.
I'm such a lousy note taker and I'm getting better, but I have to use color-coded pens.
That's awesome.
But I can't keep up. Like
No.
yesterday, I got to a point where, he had passed this, what I had started to write down, and he was on the next thing, and I was just like, forget it.
Mine just said it was like taking a sift through a fire hose.
A what?
A sift through a fire hose.
Yeah.
Part of that is, of course, because this is a semester course thrown down.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, just note-taking thing, I've never been very good at it. I used to try to write everything they said, and it was like, then I figured out, okay, you just write, like, heading and write the main things down. So I've gotten better at it, and then I decided to do the color-coded pens, which is not hard, but
Each day will have a
it doesn't,
You can wave at everybody, Joe, if you want to go in front of the camera, we're live.
anybody
Everybody
watching.
get a wonderful look at
45 people watching that.
this beautiful mug.
We had,
Here?
Yes.
When we were doing it up there?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I was people watching right now.
We'll look at it afterwards.
So what do you think the chances are we could scale up another extension cord?
Sam said she had one. Is that the one she had? I really don't think we're gonna find one.
In the office would be the easiest place to live. Did anybody ever get bags for the stupid vacuum cleaner? I bet not.
No, no, this will work. This will work great.
Is it?
No extension cord? Oh, you found it.
There it is, yes.
Is it in the office?
In the supply room.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to get this side and I get that side?
Yeah.
Slide it forward. Maybe even a little.
It's definitely better. I think on a bigger, if you expand that screen, it might actually read.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, no problem.
Could go a little closer, I guess, without hurting anything.
Okay.
That's as close as it's probably gonna get.
Yep.
No. You'll see it's an old picture with this.
You're gonna change things. Yep, you're there, it's live.
Yeah.
What if our thing is broken?
Work out great. Right, a little bit. Trash can, the building blocks, yeah, I think we, in your mind, can we roll a dumpster in here to give it that ambience, you know?
Okay.
So when do we go live?
We're live. We've been live for about.
We've been live.
Yes, 2 o'clock.
So everybody hears everything we say?
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
Hello,
Good.
everybody out there in TV land.
Okay, so what do we have here, about 20, 25 people, something like that? No? Okay, anyway. Let's, hey, Joe.
Yeah,
Why don't you pray us in?
yeah, let's do it. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you for the breath in our lungs. Lord, we thank you for sustaining us, Lord. Lord, as we dive into this, Lord, give Brian the wisdom, Lord, to teach us, Lord, how to evangelize effectively, Lord. Help us win souls, Lord, for your kingdom. Ultimately, it's you who do the work through us, Lord. So, Lord, teach us and lead us, Lord. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, I like that. It's the Lord who works through us, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If we had to rely on our own wisdom, we'd be dead in the water, man. But it is good that God uses us. He seems to take joy in using us, you know? Maybe it's just like a dad with his kids.
Mm-hmm.
He just loves to have his kids along for the ride, you know? At least some dads. Well, before we go any further for today, I want to just backpedal. I'm sorry, I have to use Washington speak now. I'm going to circle back and see if there's any questions left outstanding from our session yesterday. Anyone? Bueller? Oh, yeah.
One question I heard, actually, when I was explaining things to the wife, particularly about the Bible code thing, she immediately, and as you say, some of the stuff apparently in the book is of concern. She asked, how does some of those things differ than from the numerology stuff that they get into and the whatever the ball is that they.
Yeah, well, the main difference is it's explicitly verbal. So there's not a lot of room for interpretation. Once the text is nailed down, the text is the text.
Right.
The words say what the words say. When you look into things like numerology and stuff, it's often a huge percentage of it is interpretation and therefore subjective.
Right.
Whereas
And they
text
try
is
to-
more objective.
They
It
try
says,
to apply it to their life.
yeah,
and
yeah.
They live by it, whereas this is not anything like that. It's just showing you
It's just showing you the text.
the text. Yeah.
And it's just interesting that there are those other layers of meaning hidden in the text.
Yeah.
Now, it's not something that you can get real dogmatic about because, you know, it could be that there's some accidental alignments there. It's just unusual when you get, they're always in multiples of 7.
Yeah.
And when you get multiples of 7, these codes that show up, it's kind of creepy stuff, but it's just interesting that it's there, and it's pretty much undeniable. Where people go off the rails is where they start trying to get it down into, being prophetic and predicting every little detail of some obscure, thing. So and so is going to be elected president or something.
Yeah. But it doesn't do that. So.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
And that's just the equidistant letter counting. When you get into the actual, like the names of the first 10 generations after Adam, those names summing up to be a synopsis of the Christian gospel, that's just inexplicable.
That's just God.
Yeah. The only criticism I think that could be leveled against that is that, like I said, some of those names, the meaning of the names are controversial. In other words, yeah, it can mean that, but it might mean something else because it's in a language from a long time ago, and some of that stuff is sometimes lost. So it's a little bit controversial, but apparently there's enough people that have followed through on it. I'm not one. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm continuously learning Hebrew. The more I study the Bible, the more I find myself learning the languages. I will never be a scholar of those things, though. I'm a lover, not a fighter. Okay, so what we covered last time, I was just going to recap it, but I want somebody else to do that. Just briefly, just what were the main topics from yesterday? I want to make sure you guys are getting this.
So looking at my notes, like in the introduction, even over like the commandments, the first commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, which, like you were saying, with all your mind.
Yeah.
Okay? We have to be, knowledge is not just learning stuff. When you're learning it from the Bible, it's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting knowledge and wisdom, which,
Good.
loving the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, that's just what you're doing. And you do that first, and then all the knowledge and stuff's going to come.
Right. So that was the basis for it. There's the need for apologetics, is because God tells us to.
Right.
To love God with all your mind is to make yourself conscious of your own beliefs and why you believe them.
Right.
And then be able to communicate those things.
Right.
What's the main reason why Christianity is dying today?
Universities.
That's the means.
Yeah.
That's one
What's
of
the
them.
reason?
Because Christians are falling away, that they're just not, as children, they're not taught like we were taught. Even in my generation, like kids just were not given very much biblical information,
Yeah.
You go to church, come home. During the week, you don't do a whole lot, and that's kind of the way it's going, and people aren't reading to their children. And
Right.
That sort of thing.
Right. Well, so that's another how. That's another means by which things are falling apart, and that's more educational than it is specifically Christian.
The authority.
That's happening outside the church as well.
The authority of the gospel is no longer respected in society.
Okay, that's another reason.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for something else that was very specific to what we talked about. We talked about all those things, to be sure.
Well, truth. Like God, like I put down there, God calls us to knowledge of the truth. And, they don't, to the world right now, truth is relative. So they make truth whatever they want it to. But God's truth in the Bible is the only truth that you can really rely on.
We regard that as absolute truth.
Right.
Right.
Somehow we have more with our heart, it's a balance.
Bingo.
Balance, yeah, that's
It's the balance
You're
issue.
looking right at it.
We have a strong, ever since about, really the mid to late 19th century, when serious academic and scientific challenges to the Christian faith, the authenticity of the Bible, etc., were on the rise, Christians backed away. We ceded that intellectual territory without fighting for it. Because we have answers, just nobody was presenting them.
You know, it surprises me that, and I mean, like, I have to say I'm guilty of it too, but it's amazing how Christians, like, can go through their life and they it's like you're afraid to you know, challenge. Like, if somebody challenges you, you're afraid to get into it. You know, it's like, you're like, oh no,
Right.
they're going to ask me a bunch of questions and I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to tell them the wrong thing.
Right. Well, you recognize you're unprepared.
Yeah.
It's like having a bully choose you onto a fight at the bike racks after school. You're afraid because you're not a fighter. Well, we are, what did Jude say? What are we supposed to do?
Contend for the faith.
Contend earnestly for the faith, delivered once to the saints.
Yeah.
We are to contend. And that's what we have not been doing, is training people how to contend. Now, contend doesn't mean fight or argue or bicker. It just means to represent the truth. Now, a person can accept it or not. They can reject it. I mean, you're not forcing it on them. They will say that you're, well, why are you forcing your religion on me? I'm not. You asked a question. I'm giving you an answer. Should be as, you know, strained as it gets. But the main thing is that the reason why the Christian faith is literally dying out is because Christians for pretty much 2 centuries now have been trained that the only thing that counts in your faith is your heart. And that's not a good answer. When people have questions, you say, well, I feel it in my heart. You know? You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart, says the hymn, right? The old hymn. Well, that's all true. It's not that that's not good. It is good. It's like Pastor Ben was talking about today. It is good. But there's the other half too. And when you neglect that other half, you go out of balance. And now you can't stand up in the world where people are asking questions that require some actual answers. I'm going to scare you a little bit here. When people in Revelation 21 are being sent into the pit, what's the number 1 sin on the list?
Cowardice. Cowardice is actually a sin.
What was that verse you gave?
Cowardliness. It's in the beginning of Revelation 21. I think it's 21. Pretty sure it's either 21 or 22. I think it's 21. Yeah. So we have to get rid of our cowardice. We have to be willing to be bold, and you know, God will help you with that. That's what the Holy Spirit's there for. He will bring to your remembrance, right, those things which I have taught you. Jesus said that's his job.
Right.
But you have to be willing to step out in faith. But we don't have blind faith. Christianity is not blind faith. It's an informed faith. In the same way, your boldness has to be informed. You can't just jump out, you know, unprepared. I mean, you can. You know, what the heck? God can use that. But you're better off.
God can use anybody, even with the words in their mouth.
Right. Right. Okay, so the second part yesterday, what was the subject? What did we talk about in the second lecture?
Truth.
No?
The history of the Bible?
That's close, yeah. The veracity of the Bible.
The veracity.
Yeah, the authenticity, the truthfulness of the Bible. And we saw that there is the largest manuscript tradition in human history, the best quality manuscript tradition due to a variety of factors. Remember how the Hebrew scribes are so diligent to get every letter exactly right every time they made a copy of a biblical book? You remember it's probably not a punishment. You remember the thing they had to do if they made a mistake? One mistake. You're halfway through copying the book of Genesis. You make one mistake, one letter is wrong. You have to destroy the whole thing, burn it, go to God for forgiveness, you know, engage in all kinds of practices, and then start over again. So they're highly motivated to get it exactly right. New Testament scribes are a little bit less diligent, so we have a little bit more textual variation. But we also, as you may recall, have more New Testament manuscript documents. So naturally, there's going to be more textual variations. And again, people say, well, there's 250,000 textual variants in the New Testament manuscripts. That's false. There are 250,000 incidences of a far lower number. In other words, one mistake that's copied 4 times is not 4 mistakes or 5 mistakes. It's still just 1 mistake. And about 3% of the textual variants have some kind of impact on the basic doctrines of the Christian faith. In other words, almost none. The vast majority, 97%. Look, you can't get the New York Times to be 97% accurate. So let's have a common standard here. The Bible was extremely well represented. Like I said, you take all the ancient literature, all the manuscripts for ancient literature from all the rest of the world and combine them, and they will not add up to what's been available to the Bible ever since it was beginning to be reproduced. Translation, sometimes people say, well, that's, you're reading the wrong translation. Translation is basically a matter of style. It's not a matter of accuracy. I mean, sometimes it is, to be sure. There's some really bad translations out there. Most of them you've never even heard of because nobody uses them because they're so bad. Before yesterday, had any of you ever heard of the Joseph Smith translation? Most Mormons don't even know that there is such a thing. So,
And is that a Mormon guy?
yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the veracity of the Bible, and before that we talked about the reason why we have apologetics. And thank you, amigo. And really, it's not just a reason for it; it's the reason why God has pretty much commanded us to engage in this practice of being able to defend the claims of the Christian church. And again, defense doesn't mean you become defensive. It just means you have an apology, which in Greek means a reasoned defense, a reasoned explanation. Here's why we believe this. The vast majority of Christians today cannot answer any of those questions. Why do you believe it? I don't know, I just believe it. Okay, thanks. And how does the world read that? What do they call that?
Blind faith.
Superstition. When you believe in things you don't understand. I think Stevie Wonder's definition of superstition is probably the best there ever was. It's exactly what it is. When you believe in things you don't understand. How does the Ouija board move? I don't know. It's a spirit, I guess.
Yeah, that stupid Ouija board. I remember when I was a kid, my sister bought that.
Yeah.
And she got in trouble and it got thrown away. But when she first bought it, my brothers and me and her sat around trying to get the thing to move. It would never move. It would never go anywhere. And it's like, now that I'm older and have a more Bible wisdom, I know that it's like God would never let it,
right.
Let the demons start moving the thing because we're all little Christian kids.
Right, right. Well, I'm gonna.
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the Bible being copied, and you said something about it has to be done 3 times, or there's 3 copies made, or something like that, or 3 guys have to look at it.
But maybe you're talking about the King James version on how they put that together, but that wasn't the 3.
No, I don't remember. I don't remember that.
Okay, well.
We did talk about the process that the scribes used. We talked about the counting. Oh, you know what? It was the letter counting, because they would count. They would make an exact copy. So they're sitting there writing. I'm going to get it right this time. I'm going right to left the way they do. And they get to the end of the line. Then they go back to the original, the one from which they were copying. They count the letters. And they come back over here and they count the letters. And if it was like a couple letters short, they would know there was an error. Now they're going to destroy the copy, start all over from the original again.
Right. Okay.
And maybe that was what that was.
Yeah. No, that wasn't it, because
okay.
I just wrote that down basically, but that's okay. It was
Okay.
probably
Well, we're going to, now that we've sort of laid the groundwork for apologetics, first of all, we've established the need for it. Why does God want us to do apologetics? And remember, 1 Peter 3:15 and Jude 1:3 and other exhortations to contend for the faith are general. They're in the general epistles. They're aimed at everybody. This is for everyone to engage in. And in these days, if you're going to do evangelism, think of it as pre-evangelism. You've got to plow the field before you can even plant the seed now. It used to be the field was pretty reasonable. People would at least respect the Bible. That's not true anymore. The vast majority of people have very little or no respect for the Bible. So you have to explain to them, here's why what I'm telling you is based on this and why it's therefore true. So you think of apologetics as pre-evangelism. Did Jesus send people out to evangelize? Yeah, what was Matthew 28:18, is it? Go ye into all the world and do what? Make disciples.
Disciples, yeah. And making disciples isn't just saying, do you believe? Yeah, you believe. Okay, you're good.
Yeah. It's not convert. He didn't say make converts.
Right.
So make disciples.
Right.
And that means you take time with people. You take time with your friends and you raise them up. You show them.
Right.
You take them in depth and be able to answer their questions. Right. This is the thing we're not doing very well at. So people are going with their question unanswered. Why should they take it seriously? You know, if I went to some, I don't know, Buddhist guy and said, well, you know, I know about the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. Can you explain this to me and why I should think that they're true? And if all he could say was, well, you just have to take it on faith, I'd be okay to see it. That's not telling me anything, right? Well, it's the same thing for Christians. When people treat us that way, when people ask us those questions, and we say, well, you have to feel it in your heart. Look, I feel it in my heart all day, every day. Okay, but that's not a good answer. I mean, it kind of is, because you know they want to feel it too. But you know, some people have a serious question. Now we're going to learn later on in this course about how to discern between a true apologetics problem and another kind of problem, and they're just masking it with intellectual questions. That's a real thing. As a matter of fact, most of the time that's what's going on. But we're not going to talk about that now. Today, we're going to talk about two things, two major apologetic issues. We could cover several different issues, but today we're going to cover two. And one is the existence of God. It's probably one of the most commonly asked questions. Pastors and counselors and theologians and, you know, I'll call them professional Christians. I don't like that term, but it's kind of what they are. Plus just us lay people. We get asked this question a lot. How do you know God is real? You tell me all this stuff about God, but I
have never been asked that question.
Really? Well, where do you live?
Here.
Yeah, Bible Belt.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Jesus.
Yeah, and
At least
I
I
came
think
from
they do.
Oklahoma, so.
You know, it's the same thing in Belize. Down in Belize, it's interesting because there are not a lot of Christians, but there's a lot of people who believe in God. And I think there's still a lot of that in America, but it's getting less and less and less. And less. So.
Yeah, they only believe in God because their parents told them to.
Yeah, you kind of grew up with it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an inherited belief.
Yeah.
But they perhaps never even really thought about it much. I mean, some people have, some people haven't.
And then they go on to treat their kids the same way or worse. They don't even tell them about it, and then they grow up saying, "What's God?"
And you've lost a generation. So is God real? Well, yeah, obviously, asking that question in this room, the answer is always going to be yes. But we're talking about how do we represent this to people who don't think God is real or are genuinely curious. There are people who say, well, I'd like to know more about that. There are some of those out there. And so the question is, how do you know? By what means? How do you know? Or if it's a little bit more confrontatory, a person will say, well, can you prove it? What did we say about yesterday? What did we talk about yesterday? We talked about when somebody asks, can you prove something? What's the first thing you do? Yeah, what would you accept as proof? If I don't know what you're going to accept as proof, I can't tell you if I can prove it or not.
Yeah.
And that may sound like a dodge, but it's true because most people themselves don't know what proof is. They think something is proved when I believe it.
And most of them will say, show me God.
Yeah. That's a very common thing. So we're going to talk about that. There's what are known as the 5 classical arguments for the existence of God. We're going to look at some of those today. Some of them just briefly, and then we're going to go into depth on a couple of them. And there's a lot more. I don't have enough time to cover all of them.
Say that again, 5?
The 5 classical arguments for the existence of God. These are, and we say arguments, remember, we're not talking about screaming and yelling or bickering with each other. We're talking about reasoned, presentations. Here's why we believe this. Now, most people will tell you, you can't prove that God exists. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I probably could have bought the ability to prove that God exists. But you know what? We can. And it's not even hard. It's not as difficult as it sounds. You can actually prove that God exists. But there's a process you have to follow. You can't just jump in and start throwing evidence at people. The smart ones have heard all those before. And they're standing there with their baseball bat, and they're going to whack every one of them. So you gotta be kind of, Jesus sent out those guys and he said, you gotta be wise as serpents and gentle as doves.
Yeah. It's funny because it's not funny, but it amazes me that, like, you know, people that I've been around who are very, you know, very, very bad people, just they do all kinds of bad things and it's obvious and they talk about it and they think it's fun and whatever. Now, I used to work in a call center. Okay, so all these young kids, younger than me, you know, talking about partying and all that and everything. And it's very interesting to me that, you know, when they did talk to me, they knew not to talk to me about their party stuff because if they said something wrong or whatever, I'd tell the boss, right?
Yeah.
Or show me something bad, I'd, you know, the boss, he's going to go talk to him. But when I left that place, and I, you know, basically I told them many times, you know, it's not me that's not the nice person, or it's not me that did that, it's God in me, you know. And when I left there, you know, like a lot of the young kids came up to me and said, you know, you're the nicest person I've ever known. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I'm not really nice. It's God in me that's nice. And it's like they could see that I had something that they didn't have.
Yeah.
But, you know, but they didn't, they were too busy trying to
yeah.
exalt themselves to their own pleasures.
Right.
That, you know, they wouldn't change, so.
Right. They're just curious.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes that's as far as you go. So how do we know God's real? Well, I'm gonna give you, like I said, three arguments to use. The first one, we're just going to call it from nothing to everything. Right? There's a more technical name for it, but I'm going to try to kind of just give these things some soft titles. The next one is, does it look like someone designed it? And that really breaks down into two parts, which we'll see in a minute. And the next one is a question, what is right? Or you could say, what's the difference between right and wrong? Now, these are actually three classical arguments for the existence of God, but I've just retitled them. And we'll get into the real names for them as we go. The first one,
the third one?
The third one is, what is right?
What is right?
Or what's the difference between right and wrong? Okay. And the big question is, how do we know? How do we know? How do we get from nothing to everything? Second one is, how do we know that somebody designed it? Does it look like somebody designed it? And there's more to that than it sounds like. And finally, what's the difference between right and wrong? What's right? And how do you know? See, we're in a world of moral relativism right now. Moral relativism has overtaken our culture. You know, nobody can actually live that way, but they talk like that all the time. More on that in a moment. So we're going to go to from nothing to everything. This is my favorite because I kind of like cosmology and science and that sort of thing. That's just kind of the brain I've got. So I'm kind of a geek. I sit around reading books on, you know, quantum physics. They're layman's books. I can't even begin to do the math. But these are good books, like by guys like Brian Greene, who has done a great job, you know, describing the state of modern physics and cosmology. And it's a very fascinating field. It's weird because some of these guys think of some really wacky stuff that couldn't possibly be true, and they go all with it. But anyway, I just love that kind of stuff. And so this leads me, when I'm calling from nothing to everything, is actually known as a cosmological argument. Now that's a big bunch of syllables you can impress your friends with at parties. Well, I have a cosmological argument. You sound like you know what you're talking about right away. When we're done here, you're going to know what you're talking about. It's not hard. This stuff has big words, but it's easy to do.
And you just don't ever want to say that to a Jewish person.
Yeah. Yeah, don't
You're a
try to do this.
cosmetologist, and you think you're going to tell me about God?
Cosmetologist?
Yeah. Yeah, because they won't know what the
Yeah,
word
right,
you just
right.
said means, so they'll think that
So
it's the same
things that begin to exist have a cause. This is a fundamental, what's called an axiom. It is an obvious idea. Can somebody give me a counterexample? Show me something that began to exist but was not caused to exist. No? Okay. I'm going to take that as a no. You know the reason why you can't? There aren't any.
Yeah.
This is a universal truth. And I challenge you, I challenge anybody, when I get into these conversations, when I teach these classes, I always ask the same question: can somebody give me a counterexample? Nobody ever has. Nobody's ever even tried. It's just kind of like, because we're not used to thinking like this. Get used to it. This is important. The reason why you can't think of a counterexample is because this is absolute truth. Everything that begins to exist was caused by something not itself. If you think about it, it should be obvious why. If it already existed, it could not cause itself to exist, nor would it need to. It's a self-canceling problem. Well, what about things like universes? Can a universe begin to exist? All right, I'm going to do a little experiment here. You guys have to go with me. Those of you online have to close your eyes when I say to. Okay, it's just going to be a little thought experiment. And if you want to get the full impact of what I'm saying, please go along with it. Okay, you guys here, close your eyes. Close them now. Do not look. Wait. Open them up again. Hold on a second. I want you to observe this space right here. Right? Some wires, a wooden floor. Okay. A turtle, yeah. But just like right around this area right here. Okay. Oh. Observe that space. Now I want you to think that that is absolute nothingness. Right? Let that represent nothing. That the empty space right here.
Air.
Yeah, and there's not even air for this experiment. There's just nothingness. It's a void. Okay. That is when we say from nothing to something. This is the nothing part. Okay. Or when we say from nothing to everything. Right. Here's the nothing. All right. Now close those eyes. Right? You're not looking. Nobody's looking. Looking is forbidden. There can be no looking. Stop thinking about looking. Don't even try. And now look. How'd that get there?
Someone put it there.
What? You think somebody put this here? No. It just happened. It just appeared. It did. It just, there was nothing and then there was something. It just, and what is it? It's one of those little traffic things, right? And you can see that it's got a little, it looks kind of like a humanoid shape or maybe a Martian or something. It's got a nice little hat and it looks like two eyes and maybe hands and legs. It looks like an actual thing, doesn't it? Well, here's the thing. Those of you who have been around for more than maybe 12 seconds of life, you know that you don't get something from nothing without a cause. It's a physical impossibility. Now, that's just a little example. That's just one little thing. That's not everything, that's just a thing. Would you believe me if I told you that it just appeared? Of course you wouldn't. Are you going to believe me if I tell you the entire universe just appeared? It just... No, of course not. Because you're not stupid. But for some reason, people just sort of assume that the universe just appeared. Or worse, that it's always been here. Now that's a physical impossibility for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into. I'll just briefly touch on the fact that it's a logical impossibility because to get to this moment, you'd have to be able to cross a point in eternity. Coming from an eternal past, you'd have to be able to get here. Well, you can't do that coming from eternity, you see, because it's eternally distant going the other way. So now we've moved ahead a few moments, right? You couldn't get to this moment either. So moment to moment, you couldn't exist in time. if the universe had been here forever. I know it sounds a little twisted, but the math is all there. Didn't fully understand it, but I read it, and it's just logical, too. Another reason why we know that that is just nonsensical is because there's this thing called the Second Law of Thermodynamics, which says that all matter is in a state of continuous radioactive decay. Well, if all matter has been decaying since forever, it would necessarily be gone by now. Is it gone? I'm seeing a lot of matter all around me. I do every day. I'm made out of matter. I seem to be here. So just a couple of reasons. There's other reasons too. But now I'm going to jump over to a slightly controversial subject. It's called the Big Bang. Everybody's heard that term. Christians have been trained to be afraid of the Big Bang. It's like, oh, they think it replaces God as the source of creation. No. The question is, what caused the Big Bang? Now, if you read Stephen Hawking, in particular his book, A Brief History of Time, you'll hear him say something very interesting. He will say that the Big Bang was preceded by an, quote, infinitesimally small point. You know what another word for infinitesimal is?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yes.
Infinitely small means nothing. I mean, mathematically and just conceptually, it means nothing. So the universe came out of nothing. Okay, that sounds weird, but how? Well, there was no cause. Nothingness just became everything. All matter, time, space, energy began to exist without a cause. See, this doesn't make any sense. Now, just to kind of emphasize this point, let's talk a little bit briefly about how big the universe is. These numbers are actually out of date. Built this slide a few years ago. At that time, there were 100 billion known galaxies. That number's almost doubled now. The average galaxy has roughly 100 billion stars in it. Some of those stars are like up to 100 times larger than our sun. Some of them are much smaller. The sun is what's called a mainline star. It's basically the middle size. It's an average size star. It's big, and it's so dense. If you look at the picture here on the screen, if you were to look at the moon, do you see the little red square here? This little corner? That's the size of this. Just the telescope is looking past the moon. Those are galaxies. That's 100 billion stars. That's 100 billion stars. You're seeing stars in the foreground. The galaxies are further away. You see the problem here? That didn't come from nothing. I mean, maybe it did come from nothing, but it came because something caused it to come from nothing. What's the Bible say? Long before anybody was aware of this stuff, this science stuff, the biblical sages, the prophets said, in the beginning, God created. John 1 says, in the beginning, the Word was God, was with God, and the Word was God. And then it goes on to say, He created everything that was created. Interestingly, the word created there, the Greek word means caused to exist. Caused to exist. In other words, He wasn't working with stuff that was already there. He caused the thing to exist. He didn't cause it to be formed or shaped into what it is. He started with nothing and caused it to exist. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made.
What's
right?
the Greek word for cause?
I can't remember it.
That's okay.
I was actually just using it online about a week ago, and I can't remember what it is right now. But if you look it up, it's John 1:3. You'll see made. The word is translated made. All things that were made by Him. Yeah, that word. And you'll find it. And any good concordance will have it.
I had an argument once with a guy at work. This was in Oklahoma long, long ago. And this guy kept telling me that the devil was here before Christ. And I was like, I told him all that I knew. I was like, okay, the devil was created. Yeah. Jesus wasn't created. Jesus, and it says right there in the beginning, the Word
Was with God.
created,
The Word was
was God,
And he made all
He
things that
made
were
all
made.
things.
Yeah.
The Word made all things, and the Word is Jesus Christ. And he's like, no, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Go to verse.
I could went on arguing with it forever, I think.
Go to verse 14.
Yeah.
It says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Nails it right down.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at a galaxy. This is a very conventional galaxy form. It's a spiral galaxy. Highest density of stars is in the center. That's why it's so bright. That's not a sun. That's a collection of stars that are just so close together. Interestingly, there's so much space in space between the stars that galaxies often collide, but stars almost never do. There's so much space that the galaxies will pass through each other, and the stars won't hit because there's just so much empty space. What will happen is the gravitational field between the stars will pull matter off of each other. So as they pass, this one pulls like hot gases and stuff off of this one, and vice versa. So you get these weird wispy-looking things of light sometimes between galaxies, and sometimes between stars, and sometimes stars do collide, but it's extraordinarily rare. It's hardly ever been observed. In fact, it's theoretical. You think out of all those galaxies and stars, there should be so much stuff crashing into each other. No, the space, the distance between everything in space is so huge that the statistical likelihood of collisions is.
And who's in control of where those stars and galaxies move around to?
Well, you can say it was God.
Yeah.
Who put it all in motion.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean he's driving the ship? Controlling the,
No,
manually controlling each one?
but it might mean that, he had put in place, something that kept them from colliding into each other.
Right.
He made them move
So that they-
the way
yeah.
he wanted them to move.
Built the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like he built us.
Yeah. So, from nothing to everything, what we can say is that we know that you cannot get anything out of nothing without a cause. Now, I can start with nothing, and we'll say this, we'll just say, well, there's air above this stage, but there's no funky little plastic man. But for there to be a little funky plastic man there, somebody has to make one or bring it here. That's just so obvious. You have to break this thing down sometimes at such basic levels to get to the point where you can break through somebody's misunderstanding. It's so obvious you really shouldn't have to explain it, but the truth is, for that to happen, somebody, in this case me, an agent, a conscious agent, had to make that happen. How do we know that the thing that caused the universe to exist was a person? Well, there's a variety of reasons. We don't have time to do them all, so we're going to do one, and that is, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just, I'm kind of going to summarize this again. So we know that things that begin to exist have a cause, and we know that the universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. That's a basic logical syllogism. Two premises add up to a conclusion. Things that begin to exist have a cause. The universe began to exist. That's a scientific fact. And therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay. Now, by the way, the effectiveness of this argument at dislodging atheism has been so high that atheist scientists are scrambling like mad, trying to find evidence of an eternal universe. So we have the theory of the multiverse. Oh, well, this universe is just one of billions. You don't understand. You just made the problem a lot worse for yourself. Originally, we were talking about just one universe. Now you're talking about an infinite number of universes. Where did they come from? Show me the proof. You can't. To get scientific proof, which means empirical evidence, you'd have to actually escape this universe, go to the other one, and get something from that universe and bring it back. How do you leave the universe? Which direction do you go to eventually get outside the universe? Well, that's a theoretical impossibility. You can't leave the universe. There are mathematical models that kind of do that stuff, but mathematical models come and go. Empirical science cannot demonstrate what they're claiming. There's the what's it called? The Rebound Theory. This universe is it's the same universe. It just keeps expanding and contracting. Okay, great. Where did it come from? just saying that it has been expanding and contracting for a long time doesn't account for the fact that it began to exist. And it certainly doesn't set you up for an eternal existence because, as it turns out, the amount of energy involved in that expanding and contracting would actually cause the universe to decay very rapidly because it's burning itself up basically over and over again. And eventually it just kind of loses the ability to expand and contract because it just goes to one or the other. It either goes to the heat death, total expansion, where everything moves away and it all freezes, or the heat death of it all collapses together again and just stays there. Well, that's been going on since forever. It would have been done by now. And if it had a beginning, well, now you were back to square one. How did it begin? Right? So.
You want to hear something funny? When I was a little kid, and I mean a very little kid, I got this idea in my head that about the universe and stuff. And I kept asking people, well, if the universe has an end, you know, like out there somewhere the universe ends,
Boundaries.
What's beyond the universe?
Yeah.
And I used to ask everybody that because it bugged me and bugged me. And to this day, I still think about that, but now I just think, well, God's out there.
Yeah, God is outside the creation.
Yeah.
Common misconception is that God lives inside the universe somewhere, like a spaceman. You know, he lives by some planet or in a spaceship or something. No, that's not. God caused the universe to exist. Therefore, he cannot be inside it.
Right.
He can enter it, but his ontological nature does not begin or survive inside the universe.
Right.
So the big question is, since we have a caused universe, what caused the universe? Well, the obvious answer is that if you can cause a universe to exist, you're probably a god. If there's a higher qualification for what it means to be God, I would like to hear it. Somebody tell me what else somebody has to do to be considered a god, causing time, space, matter, and energy to spontaneously exist. It's another question I never get an answer to. I kind of get blank stares. The universe is caused. The next obvious question is, okay, what or who caused it? My answer is, well, whatever it is, I think we can call it a God or God. Now, you'll notice that this argument doesn't necessarily go all the way to the Christian God. Somebody could say, well, it was actually Allah who caused this. Well, supposedly that's the biblical God just through another so-called prophet. But somebody could say, well, it was caused by, you know, some god named Unga Bunga Bunga. And, you know, I mean, theoretically, they might be telling the truth because it was caused by a god. The main thing here is, how do we know it's the biblical God? Well, the biblical God is the one that claims to have created all things. Most people don't know this, but the gods of Rome and Persia and India, none of them claimed to have created the universe. So why you would think they did is kind of a mystery. You're just kind of guessing, aren't you? Also, how do we know that what caused the universe to exist was a conscious being? Well, because if it was a thing, like an object, then that object would itself have to be inside space somewhere. All physical objects occupy space. They have an extension in space. They have density. They have a chemical composition. They are made out of matter. If it was a thing that caused the universe to exist, then it didn't cause the universe to exist because it already existed before it caused the thing that has to contain it. So that doesn't work. So this is a very, very strong argument because it's really hard to get around the logic of it. So far, some philosophers who've kind of poked at it and, you know, they found some kind of, they kind of created some chinks in the armor, but the meat of the argument stands to this day. Because every path you try to take to get away from it just leads to more problems. Mm-hmm. Now, there's this principle in science as well as in philosophy called Occam's razor. It means the simplest explanation is the best one. Yeah. The simple explanation is the obvious one. What causes things to exist? Some kind of intelligent entity, an agent of some kind that says, I think I want to do this. It's a thought that manifests somehow. It's God saying, I want to do this, and then doing it. All right. So that's called, the technical name for that is a cosmological argument.
That which we just talked about is a
Cosmological.
cosmological.
It's actually, technically, it's a cosmogenic argument, but everybody calls it cosmological. The difference is cosmology is the study of the universe. Cosmogenesis is the cause of the universe, or the beginning of the universe. So cosmogenic argument is actually the more accurate term, but nobody uses it. Okay, so we've looked at the from nothing to everything, also known as the cosmological argument. What about drilling down a little bit deeper? We now have a second layer. Let's say we know that the universe was caused, but how do we know it was a conscious entity? Well, the reasons we gave, but here's another one. I call it the does it look like someone designed it argument. It's also known as the argument from design. Argument from design. Not only did the universe begin, it looks like it had a design. It looks like somebody consciously said, here's how this thing is going to work. It doesn't look like a sea of endlessly random collisions of meaningless matter in an empty void. It somehow produced all the things we see in creation. So, does it look like someone designed it? Well, what things look designed? A couple of examples. Spiral galaxies, wheel galaxies, jellyfish, DNA, a toucan, the ocean, a human being. Do these things look like they're designed? I don't know. Do they have integrity of function? That's what design means. Right? For something to be designed, it has to have an intentionality. It has to have a functionality, and they have to come together. I intended to do this, and it does. That's what a designer does. Well, does it look like it was designed? Well, yeah, and if it looks like it, it probably means it was. It's a common sense kind of thing. You sound kind of foolish to yourself when you break it down like this, because, yeah, obviously. But there are people who really struggle with this. It's like a major mental problem. And sometimes very smart people. I think it's because they just don't want to face the necessary conclusion. They suppress the truth and unrighteousness, says Paul in Romans 1. All right, so what about this design thing? Designed things look like they were designed. Take a wristwatch, for example. And one of the earlier versions of this argument is called Paley's watch. Paley was a theologian, pastor, and he put forward this argument. He said, if you're walking through the forest one day and you find a wristwatch, would it seem to you that that was made by somebody? Or would it seem to you like it was just an accident of nature? You probably wouldn't, but let's say somebody who's never seen a wristwatch before. Well, they pick it up and they go, oh, it's all these different materials, glass, leather, metal, whatever, come together. And there's this leather band. It has holes on one side and a little buckle on the other. Gosh, they go together. And it just happens to fit about the size of my wrist. And hey, that thing's moving. That little ticky thing there, it's going tick, 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 it's moving. There's an 8 and there's a 12. The hourglass says it's about 8 o'clock. This has 8. It's giving me information. Since when did random collections of matter generate information? Like what time it is? See, it doesn't make any sense. But there are people who say, oh yeah, nature could do that. Look, in the most twisted, tortured sense, it is, in the most twisted, tortured sense of the word, it is possible, extraordinarily unlikely, like cosmically unlikely, but still theoretically possible, that conditions could be just right, that atoms all just kind of fell in the right place, the metal somehow molded, mined itself out of the ore, milled itself into metal, shaped itself just like a clock or a watch, and somehow that metal accidentally got filled up with gears and sprockets that are all precisely the right size. Theoretically, like I said, in the most tortured sense of the word possible,
That is possible. But that it would convey information, accurate information about the world, out of the question. Absolutely out of the question. You've already tortured the word possible until it's dead. Now you're going to add on, you're going to hit it with an atomic bomb. Really? So it communicates information now about the world around us, like what time it is? No. It doesn't work that way. That's impossible. That's literally impossible. So things like watches are actually pretty simple compared to things like, I don't know, the human reproductive process. Rather a complicated series of biological events. That just happened. It just appeared. Oh, it evolved. We'll talk about that later. Obviously not. I mean, obviously these things are designed. So the question arises, who designed it? Well, just like if you can make a universe begin to exist, I suggest that if you can design a universe that works, you're probably a god. It's going to start sounding like Jeff Foxworthy pretty soon. You might be a god if you created a universe.
Sounds pretty good.
That's, you know, the fact is, it looks like it was designed, so it probably was. But I told you there's two parts of the design thing. We're not talking about just the appearance of design. We've already touched on it a little bit. We're going to talk about the function of the design. Designed things have what's called in philosophy a teleological quality or purpose. That is, they have an end purpose. They exist for a reason. Something that's designed was designed for a reason. We don't just design things like spaceships because we think they look neat or they might function and let's see what happens. We usually design them because we have an intention to put it to work somehow. The person who first picked up a rock and attached it to a stick with some leather straps and made a hammer or a war club out of it had some reason for doing that. It had a functionality. No matter what it looks like, it has a purpose, it has a function. So let's take a look at some things. Things that were designed that nobody denies, that both look designed and function as if they were designed. Bottom left, a circuit board. That's actually a circuit diagram, it's not really a circuit board. A circuit, an electronic circuit, a complicated circuit. Let's say a computer motherboard. Computer motherboards have a function. They do things. They don't just sit there. They weren't just designed to just sit there and look nice, giving the appearance of design. They have the functionality of design. A truck. Trucks don't just happen. People build them with a functionality in mind, and they're designed to work a certain way. And when you put them on the road, by golly, they most of the time work that way. An engine, let's say the engine that's in the truck. Those of you who've done any kind of mechanical work know it's a pretty complicated piece of gear. There's a bunch of moving parts, and there's a bunch of characteristics and aspects and things that have to fit exactly right for the thing to work at all. Right? Engines don't just happen. They don't just like appear on a stage like little green men do. They don't appear in cars. Somebody designs them and then builds them. You get the point? If it looks like it was designed, it probably was. If it functions like it was designed, you just added on a huge layer of proof. There's very, very little chance now that it exists because it wasn't designed. It was somehow just a random accident. Okay, we looked at cars. Let's dig a little deeper, a little closer to our subject, and that is biology. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Why do you have eyes? To see. Anybody else want to challenge that? We have eyes for the purpose of seeing. Well, I agree. Because I come from a position that says we were designed by God, who gave us that capacity for a variety of reasons. A Darwinian evolutionist cannot say that. You don't have eyes for the purpose of seeing. You have eyes as a consequence of accidents. You just happen to have eyes. The eye evolved for no purpose. It just evolved, and it just happened to convey survival advantage and ability to see prey or enemies or something, and that just made them survive better. Darwinian evolutionists really like to pack stuff in that you're supposed to accept without question. One of those things is that, well, they sort of hide the idea that there must be a purpose behind evolution. Why? Because they intuitively recognize that it's stupid to say that eyeballs just kind of are the result of random processes with no cause and no purpose. But that's what their position is. But they can't sell that. So they'll even imbue nature with the attributes of consciousness. They'll say, well, nature gave the antelope its eyes. Giving something is an act of will. Nature doesn't have a will in Darwinian evolution. It's just random events. It's random matter colliding aimlessly in empty space. And it just happens to assemble at some point into an eyeball in some creature somewhere. And that was then passed on genetically through subsequent generations. Now, I'm not going to talk about the statistical unlikelihood of that, but let's just say it would take trillions of generations for the mutations to go around, so all the variables to fall into place where you actually get something that works, that can then survive and carry it forward. But remember, the survival advantage that it conveys is non-functional through most of that process. It's only at the end where it actually occurs. So why is it evolving in the first place? You see? It's supposed to be evolving for the purpose of conveying survival advantage, but it doesn't convey survival advantage until after it's finished being designed, or being, not designed, but evolving. See, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just basic logic. I'm not a biologist, but I can think logic. So can you. Same thing is true of the heart. Why do you have a heart? To pump blood, right? No. You don't have a heart to pump blood. You just happen to have a heart that pumps blood. It's an accident of nature. What about the reproductive system? What about the brain? What about your liver? What about your fingernails? What about every single system in your body has no purpose. It is just accidental. Each little system is an accident. And when you drill down into the microbiology, DNA, which by the way conveys information, physically impossible. Matter does not convey information, but DNA does, and it is a material thing. DNA evolved somehow by chemicals just randomly colliding against each other in an empty space, maybe a puddle, something, but it had no purpose. It just happened to become DNA, which conveyed information to the next generation by accident. I mean, yeah, I see you guys laughing because it is kind of comical. Yeah. There's a lot of people who, would be real upset to hear me say these things, but this is just, this is when philosophers look at science, we kind of see things a little differently. So the big question, of course, then is who designed the universe? Well, again, if it looks designed, it was designed. If it functions, and the human body functions most of the time, for most of us, except the brain part, that sometimes is a little weird. Yeah, probably it was designed. If you can design a universe that functions, you're probably a god. That means that there is a god. One of the things I love to hear is for atheists to say, I know that there is no God. Really? You just made yourself God. Because the only way you could know what does not exist out of all of reality would be for you to know everything that does exist, which means you're omniscient, which means you're God. So the only way I can believe you that there is no God is for me to also believe that you are God, which is interesting because you're the one telling me there's no God. So the brain twisting that has to happen for some people is tough, and you have to go through with it. So we've gone from nothing to everything. We've talked about If it looks like it was designed, it was, and entailed in that is if it functions like it was designed, it was. So you've got design. So not only do you have a universe that comes into existence, but it was designed. And all the systems within it were designed. How many systems are in the universe? Well, we can't say, but then you can't think. You don't have the capacity to do math at that level. Nobody does. No human being has ever done that kind of enumeration. There's no way to do it. It's impossible. The last one we're going to talk about is it right? This is the moral argument for the existence of God. I think we've already proven from cosmology and from design, which is kind of a subset of cosmology, that God must be real. But now we're going to talk about moral law. Now this is something that's not physical, it's not scientific. It's more ethical, philosophical, logical. What is right? Well, I'm just going to come right out and say it. Everyone in the world agrees that there's a difference between right and wrong. Well, except for mentally ill people, sociopaths. They can't tell the difference between right and wrong. But normal people know that there's the difference between what's right and wrong. Now, we'll hear arguments about what is right and what is wrong. And we are living in an age of moral relativism where people will argue, well, it's okay to do this or it's not okay to do that. So we have to kind of go to some extremes to generate examples to show that all people know that at least some things are universally wrong. Is it wrong? Ask anybody in the world, is it wrong to torture babies to death for fun? You won't go anywhere in the world where there's a culture that's, oh yeah, that's normal. Human beings have an instinct for these things. We protect our young. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't. There certainly are exceptions, but they're aberrant. They're not normal. The norm is what I'm talking about, the cultural recognition between the difference between right and wrong. These are universally true. Now, I'm not saying the specifics are universally true because there's differences in cultures on various details, like, is it wrong to eat meat? In India, you don't eat cows. That's a moral wrong. In America, we hardly eat anything but cows. So, but the principle is what we're after, that there's a difference between right and wrong. But there are extreme examples. You go to India and slaughter babies, they're going to kill you just as bad as we're going to kill you here. Well, no, here we let them go. Put them in jail for a couple of weeks and set them free. The question is, how do we know what is right? That's really what we're getting at. Well, one of the things that we all know is that we were designed, we didn't just randomly happen, we're not just matter, we were designed with a conscience. Now, does that conscience at birth, in other words, in the totally undeveloped human mind, does it exist? Well, depends on what you mean. Like if the baby is hungry, it thinks you're probably pretty wrong for not feeding it. It seems to know the difference between this is the right thing, me getting fed, and that's the wrong thing, me not getting fed. At a very young age, we pick up on that pretty quickly. But that develops as a human being grows, and it's truly enculturated. The different cultures have different senses of what's right and wrong on a lot of details, but there are certain basic things we all share. So you were designed with a conscience. The question is, how did that happen? Who designed you with a conscience? You see, if you're just matter, you can't have a conscience. This screen and this computer are fairly sophisticated pieces of technology. They don't have conscience. They can't. There's a big movement today called Transhumanism. They're all about creating robots or computers that will be equal to or superior to human beings in every respect. I say dream on, but there's been progress in some of these things. The artificial intelligence is racing forward, and they're predicting an omega point where human beings will upload your consciousness into a computer, and that's how you're going to live forever. It's not you that's living there, it's an electronic copy of you, so have fun, right? Because you're dead. But, you know, so there's all kinds of really weird stuff when you get into this consciousness stuff. But the point is we have a conscience and we have consciousness. How does dead matter develop conscience or consciousness? If you took a big pile of rocks and put it out in the wilderness somewhere, how long would it be before that developed into something that had a brain as good as yours?
Forever.
Yeah, forever, I think is a pretty good guess. Like never.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But that's what you're supposed to believe happened, because evolutionists love to hide in this period of time, billions of years, as if something changed in that time that would cause dead matter to turn into a conscious being. It evolved over time. How? They don't know. I mean, they can sort of describe it theoretically. There's no evidence of it. You know how many, macroevolution, talking about this evolution from one species to another. Like the monkey becomes the man.
None.
Well, there's supposed to be, there should be, for that many mutations to occur, that would convey survival advantage and therefore have survival advantage, to add up to survival advantage, integrated with all the other systems that are evolving in the creature. The number of mutations that would have to happen would take 1 trillion years just to go through them, like on 10 a day.
Can't cover up.
Nothing moved that fast, so it doesn't make any sense. The mutations, the microevolution, which I think exists. If you walk around in the street in the summertime with no shoes on, the bottoms of your feet are going to get kind of tough. That's microevolution. But you're not being changed into an elephant with tough feet. You've got a whole different set of DNA, a whole different kind of creature. It's a different kind of animal. There is no evidence anywhere of a transmutation of one kind of animal into another. There's mutations within a single animal as they mutate in response to their environment. That's very common, right? We do it all the time. Our bodies will respond. If you exercise more, you get more muscle. That's a mutation. And it conveys survival advantage, especially if you're involved in combat. So anyway, my point is, the number of changes that have to be made for just the physical development is one thing, but then to go into the mind and have consciousness and subsequently conscience, a sense of right and wrong to develop. Well, evolutionists will tell you that's enculturated. The tribe got together and they had their own rules, which conveyed survival advantage to them compared to the other tribe, which didn't have any rules, and they ended up all just killing each other. Well, okay, theoretically that makes sense, but where did the basic idea come from to begin with? So they had the ability, they had the capacity to think. That's different.
That would be Fijian.
Yeah. Well, a lot of science operates on, fideism, just blind faith. So we know that the universe had a cause. We know it was designed. We have come to right and wrong because the obvious, God is real. Here's Occam's razor. The one thing that solves all of these problems is God. Now, to the person for whom the physical universe is, as Carl Sagan said, all there was, all there is, and all there ever will be. If that's your worldview, this is a problem for you, because you can't imagine something outside the universe. You can't imagine that there's anything supernatural that is above nature, outside the universe. That's not in your vocabulary. So you look at this and it looks foolish to you. But to an open-minded person who can say, well, I'm just going where the evidence leads. You have all this stuff that can't have happened without some common thing making it happen. Some common thing causing the universe to exist, causing the universe to be designed, all of its subsystems and subsystems being designed, and then putting consciousness in those machines, and then making them conscious, have them be able to tell the difference between right and wrong, make moral choices. something that could at least theoretically do that would be a God. Now, we're not saying which God yet. We're not going there yet. We're just talking about trying to establish that there's God. So, the next thing I'm going to do, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to set up, and we're going to do another set of slides. I'm going to show you some examples of how these things apply, how these arguments can be made. I'm going to take you through a process. And I hope that will keep your attention long enough so that you can kind of absorb that, because this is stuff you can actually practically use. Everything up till now is in theory. Now we're going to go into something that looks very specifically. So let's take about 10 minutes. Right. We'll be back in 5 or 10.
That's some tissues over there.
What are you looking for?
She had issues with the camera when we're on break.
Oh,
We're still live.
whatever, you just put something over it.
Yep. But we still have our microphone. Yeah. Now let's talk about everybody that's watching. On a Sunday? Oh, just at the end. Who's gonna run the bank with you?
You can still hear us.
Yes, I can. So I need to-
Hi, y'all.
Oh, good stuff. Do you ever see, it's kind of funny because you talk about the omega thing. Do you ever see either the old, but even better, the later version of Battlestar Galactica? I just started watching. Okay. There is.
There's a later version?
Yeah, there was the 1970s, and then there was like the 2000s. And if you want to watch it with a video angel, because it has graphic stuff. Not necessary, but anyway. But they have a sequel to that, or a companion show called Caprica.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Now, Caprica was very interesting, because what it did was, it wasn't intentionally uploaded of your consciousness. What happened was, this supposedly because there were originally 12 planets, before the Cylons attack, and one of the planets was Caprica. Well, on Caprica, the guy that was basically Bill Gates had come up with this really cool virtual reality gaming system that everybody used. But it would literally upload, it was not just visual, it would actually upload your brain print up and then later download it. It was able to actually download and change the synapses that you would retain everything while you uploaded it. All right? And it was just for basically like our virtual reality is today. I mean, 30 years ago, that people would have been like, whatever. That is freaky stuff.
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh. But it would upload. Well, what happened was, they'd only been doing it for so many years. And the guy that was Bill Gates, his daughter apparently, then of course, like anything, there was corruption and there was people that would do like really deviant stuff. And then there was no consequences because it was all virtual. Right? And so there was, anyway, so his daughter got crazy. Long story short, if you die in it, or you can die. Right? Yeah. So anyway, she winds up dying out here, but not in there. So her consciousness still exists. So he's also got a military contract to produce basically RoboCops.
Downloads her into a.
He doesn't know that she wants it. She's trying to reach him. and she downloads herself. They couldn't quite get the AI to work right, and all of a sudden one of the models was just great. It was her. And then from that, you find out that all the whole the Cylon array, are all angry people that had been uploaded and lost in the ether. And so, anyway, it's a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
Stupid.
What's it? Big thanks on transhumanism. It's a real thing. Right. There's people working on it. So people are convinced it's going to happen. Right. So there's two variables to.
You know, it's just, when you think about it, and you think about, like, I mean, I remember, and I don't consider myself old, but that's probably because my dad didn't die until he was 96. You know, walked to his own bed and slept in it and never woke up. So, you know, I mean, I feel like, my mom was only 68 when she died, but she died of cancer, and I don't have cancer, so that's cool. But, everybody tells me, oh yeah, you're just like your dad, you're gonna live to be really old. So I think about these people, and I think about these people that make these gadgets and things, and it's like, I think back to before there was cell phones, and before there were computers that everybody could get on and stuff. I remember those days in my house. I remember my house. I remember, you know, going out and playing and having a blast. And, you know, when my dad wanted us to come home, he'd go out and he'd whistle. And he had this whistle. I don't know how he did it. His tongue would be like doubled up like that, and he'd whistle somehow through that. But the whistle was really loud. Like I could hear him from a block away, and if I was any further than that, I would have friends going, darling, your dad's whistling for you, you know. And I mean, what a life. I think back about that, I think, oh, I would give anything to have that life, you know, today as a kid. Poor kids today. You know, I mean, yeah, they don't.
Well,
they think that, you know, if I told them about my life back then, it's like, how boring that must have been.
Right.
Well, one of the things that amazed me is before my father passed away, he was 50 years older than me. Before he passed away, 6 months before he passed away, he said, you know what, I've never taken you back home. So let's take a trip. And so I had never really spent any time except for the military down in Alabama, east of Mississippi at this point in time. But he's from Lynchburg, Virginia. So he takes me back to Lynchburg and introduces me to his old friends. Well, they were, you know, further back. They were back before all of our them newfangled, you know, record players, things like that, right? So they actually had to be musicians themselves, and they had to be able to sing, and they had to be able to entertain themselves. Well, they get back together, and they erupted into songs. And they remember, and all of them could sing, and all of them would sing all these songs that you could tell they sang all the time back then.
Yeah.
Started shortly after I sent you the link. Probably have an hour or
and when
two
you
more.
say that, like the erupted in
Right
songs,
now.
and it's so weird sometimes, like when like somebody plays like 60 or 70s music, you know, my high school years,
Right.
the rock and roll, Led Zeppelin, Purple, and all that, you know, and when those songs come on the radio, I can sit and sing to them perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think to myself, why do I have that memory? I don't want to have that memory. I don't want to be able to sing these stupid songs. They're bad. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, it's weird, you know, how your brain just holds those things in. And
Mike, how long do we go today?
That
you know,
we were kind of like
Five-ish.
5-ish, 5:35, 5:30 was about
All right.
probably.
We need to get going then.
Right.
It's almost 4 now. And I got,
I still didn't get my
quick look,
green.
see if we
Hey, Mike, does your phone go online?
It can, but I've got 2%.
Oh, never mind. Let's turn
We'll
on
just
my.
go ahead and get going.
all right. Welcome back, my friends. The show that never ends.
The Dolphins are losing 17-45. Yay, go Bucks. Sorry.
Right, so we're going to continue on with the reality of God, and I'm going to have to go through this fairly quickly because I want to get to the next topic, okay, which is the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's a very important one. And we're going to talk about the historicity of the Gospels and how we know that they're telling the truth, and etc. So, going back to the reality of God issue, of course, the question is always, can you prove to me that God exists? What's the first thing you do when somebody asks you to prove something?
You try to prove it.
What is your standard of proof?
Right.
Yeah, well, you should have
what their standard of proof is, because if you don't, then they can just continuously move the goalpost.
Right.
You can offer all the evidence, and they'll say, well, that doesn't prove it because, and they'll just move the goalposts. They've got to have skin in the game, too. Mm-hmm. Why is it that Christians are the ones who always have to prove themselves, but nobody else does? See, an atheist or a evolutionist or, I don't know, a voodoo practitioner, all they have to do is assert, and their views are acceptable. For some reason, Christians, we have to back our stuff up. I suggest one of the reasons why is because we can't.
Yeah.
It's reasonable for us to be asked those questions because we actually can't answer them. Now, does that mean we have the universal comprehensive answer that stops all questions? No, nobody ever has that. But like I said yesterday, we have the sufficient answer. We can take it far enough that you can go, you know what? I will never have all knowledge such that I can proceed only on knowledge. At some point, you have to step out on faith. Everybody does that all the time, whether they're Christians or not. Everybody does it every day, their entire lives. We're always doing that. Why? Because we're not omniscient. We don't have all knowledge. But we do have sufficient knowledge to make decisions that we do make. Sometimes we're wrong. Maybe we're wrong half the time. Some of us are wrong more than that. But the first thing we got to do is draw the line in the sand. Where is the goalpost? Before I answer your question, I have to know what you will accept. And then once I know what you'll accept, I can tell you whether or not I can prove it to you. Because if your standard of proof is to show you a material example of a non-material thing, no, I can't prove that to you. I can show you why your thinking is wrong about that, but I can't prove it to you. So where are the goalposts? What will you accept as proof is a good way of asking that or responding to that question. Again, I'm not trying to be dodgy here. We're trying to get focused. We're trying to control the conversation so that we can narrow it down to an actual answer. Because unless you establish a standard of proof, you're just going to be banging around the room. Because they can theoretically and verbally run all over the room. And just keep moving the target. Can you hit this target? Can you hit it? Can you hit it? No, just plant it somewhere and I'll take my best shot. Right? That's fair. Yeah. We're just trying to be fair. All right. Second, it should cost something for them. You see, we're not talking here about simply theorizing. This isn't like two kids sitting in a college dorm smoking pot, going, oh man, I can totally prove there's like God and stuff. No, let's get serious. What if I can't? What's it going to mean to you? It's a perfectly reasonable question. We're talking about ultimate truth, ultimate reality, ultimate things of ultimate importance.
What was the second thing?
Well, this is the second thing.
Yeah, I know, but why did you say the first sentence?
That would have been this one. Somebody says, can you prove to me that God exists? You say, what will you accept as proof?
Okay, no, then I missed it. It was the next one, I guess.
Second one is you make it cost them something.
Oh, make it cost.
In other words, they have to have some skin in the game too. They're not allowed to just sit back and take pot shots. I'm making a commitment to answer your question. You owe it to me to make a commitment, if you're serious, that if I can answer it, that it's going to have an effect on you. You have to respond. If you're just interested in just shooting the breeze, I'm not interested in having the conversation because you're not serious. I think it's perfectly reasonable. If I was a salesman and somebody came in and wanted to, buy a car, I'd say, well, are you interested in buying the car? No. I just want you to spend a whole bunch of time teaching me about it. No. I have that option. Now, maybe I'll say, yes, I do it just for the heck of it, but that's not what we're about. We're about trying to communicate the truth of the Word of God. And that's something that's important. And if it's not important to you, don't ask. Don't ask until it's important, because you're not really serious. You're not really asking. It's only fair. Can you prove it? What will you accept as proof? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable thing. Now, secondly, if I can prove it, what's it going to mean to you? I want to suggest a good question is, what could be more important than having a personal relationship with God? If God is real, and if God is what the Bible says he is, can you give me something that would be more important than getting to know that God who loves you? If I can show you good reasons to think that God is real, what's that going to do for you? These are all just kind of different ways of saying the same thing. Mike, you had a question?
I was just thinking about another type of question too. Is if you're trying to establish your goalposts initially, is why do you want to know?
Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Mm-hmm. That kind of combines one and two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Why do you want to know? It's a good way of putting it. The next thing we have to do is define our terms. Because you see, unless you are clear about what you're talking about, you could offer good, solid, logical, sound arguments, good answers, and still not get anywhere, because you're talking about two different things. If I say God, what does it mean to you? If your idea of God, when you say, can you prove God exists, and your idea of God is a giant supercomputer in outer space, well, no, I can't prove that, and I'm not asserting that, so I have no obligation to prove it. I'm here to tell you about the biblical God, who is, as represented in the Bible, immaterial and transcendent. He's not an object. He's not a guy. You know, like with fingernails and a butt. He's not that. He's a transcendent being, something that caused the universe to exist and deserves some respect, you know, hopefully. So we have to define those terms. The thing is just like the word proof, when you ask somebody, you know, what do you mean by proof? Most of the time they won't even know what they mean by proof. Most people don't know what they're asking. They say, can you prove it? What do you mean by proof? That's where the conversation ends, because they don't even know what they're asking for, let alone can you provide the solution, right? It's like walking into a restaurant and saying, I'd like some food now. Okay, what would you like? Bring me food. You want cheeseburgers, some macaroni and cheese? I don't know, spaghetti? We have apples. What do you want? Food. I'm not going to waste my time with that guy. I can't solve his problem because he can't tell me what he wants. So many won't be able to define the terms God and exist either. They don't know. They say, prove God. What do you mean by God? Right? Unfortunately, that's a pretty common response to that question. What do you mean by exists? When we say something exists, if you are an empiricist, that is, you only believe in physical things, then I would suggest to you that you have to open up your mind a little bit and realize that things exist which are not physical. You'll deny that, but so now you have to go down that trail. You have to go, okay, let me prove to you that there are things that exist that are not physical. Like the content of your thought right now. That content is very real. If you don't think your thinking is real, then don't bother me. But if you think your thought actually exists, then you're agreeing with me. I'm not saying your brain chemistry. I'm saying the content of the thought. If that's insufficiently real. I love talking to audiences where there's like people and there's a man and a woman sitting together. And the man says, what's real? How about love? Do you love your wife? She's sitting right next to him. Checkmate. What's he going to say? Well, love isn't real. So you don't really love your wife, do you? Right? It's just kind of a fantasy you're indulging yourself in. See, that doesn't fly. When a quantum physicist hugs his child, does he really believe that all he's doing is putting his arms around a collection of quantum possibilities? Just a big collection of subatomic particles. Is that what he really thinks? Nobody actually lives like that. They'll talk like that because they want to keep you at a distance. They don't want to deal with reality. They'll play that game, but they don't live like that. People live what they truly believe. They can say anything they want with their mouths. This hole here can admit all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, when it comes to them making decisions, they'll always choose, or most of the time, will choose what they truly think is right and real and true. We'll be talking about that when we get to Piercy's material. You've probably read some of that. Okay, so many won't be able to define those terms. Most think of God as a physical object. The man in the sky, Bill Maher making fun of Christians saying they believe in a man in the sky. No, we don't. I don't. I've never heard anybody teach that. It's not in the Bible. I don't know where you got that idea. It's not what we believe in. So you'll have to educate them a little bit, because most people who are asking these questions aren't really prepared for the answers. They don't really even know what they're asking sometimes. So it's up to you to kind of take the lead and say, okay, let's get this figured out here. We're going to define our terms. Exists is not limited to states of matter or energy. Things exist that are not physical. God is not a physical object. God is not limited to our ideas about him. In other words, not even my ideas about God limit God. God exists independently of me. And I readily admit I don't know everything there is to know about God. I also am happy to say that neither does anybody else. It's impossible. The finite cannot comprehend or have comprehensive knowledge of the infinite. It's just that simple. For me to have comprehensive knowledge of God, I would have to be God. And I'm not. I'm far, far, far from that. So is everyone else. So God is, we've talked about what God isn't, some guy floating around the sky. What God is, according to the Bible, is a supernatural being. That is, supernatural not in the popular sense of the term, but in the very literal sense, above nature. God caused the universe to exist, therefore, he cannot be trapped inside it, because it would have had to exist before he did for him to be inside it. He's also transcendent. That is, having caused creation, he's above it. He is superior to it. The biblical word is holy. The biblical word holy means, translated from both Greek and Hebrew, it means separate. He is separate, and he's separate in the ultimate sense, that he is separated from the world in his essence. He chose to enter the world through his son, Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, he who has seen me has seen the Father, because he was visibly what God is invisibly. Somebody once said, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. And that's what Jesus is talking about. So God is transcendent, he's supernatural, he's immaterial and invisible. This Bible is very clear, it's explicit on that. Colossians 1:15 and 1 Timothy 1:17 and 6:16 and Hebrews 11:27. Go to your concordance and look up the word invisible. You'll see it's applied to God repeatedly. Remember we talked about yesterday that means if you're created in the image of God, it doesn't mean a visible thing. It doesn't mean a visual thing. It's not like God is shaped like me, because he's invisible. That means he has no visible shape. So it's not a visible image, it's something else. We suggested that it's the nature, consciousness, ability to make decisions and have moral choices and so on. We're representative of God in that way. God is also omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and sovereign. That's what we have to be able to prove. I just set the bar really high. Can I prove that? Well, I can't prove all of it, but I can prove enough of it that you can take the rest on faith, I think. Finally, what God is, well, in short, he's a supernatural, transcendent cause of creation, the sovereign Lord over the universe and the laws of nature. Therefore, his existence cannot be proven or limited by material science. See, material science does not have the vocabulary to address these issues. So this is a big problem for a lot of people, because they always revert to science. They think their best defense against God is science. Let's suspend for the time being that science was invented by Christians. who began the project because they understood that the universe is not a random collection of things. It has patterns, and you can study it because it was created by a God of order. That is the assumption upon which science, the scientific revolution, championed by men like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, the reason why they started science is that in the 1600s. Prior to that, there was what was called natural philosophy, which is a little more vague, but the physical sciences are based on the fact that there is order in the universe. If there was no order, you couldn't study it. You ever turn on a TV where the antenna is not connected right? And what do you get on the screen? It's fuzz and snow and noise. That's not a program. That's not characters playing roles. There's no commercials. It's just nonsense. That's what the universe looks like if there's no order. But there's order at every level of the universe. Something caused that order to be.
What was the year and the two guys that you said?
They're in the 1600s.
1600s? The two guys?
Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, and there's a couple other guys.
Okay.
Skipping my head right now.
Francis Bacon.
So, God's existence cannot be proven scientifically. If you're asking me for a scientific proof, my answer is no, I can't prove it to you. But I can prove it logically. Now, to some people, that's, oh, well, that's not a proof. Hold on a second. Let me help you out. The laws of thought, that's what logic is. It's the laws governing thought. Now, most people don't know that there are laws governing thought. They think thought is what I think. When I talk about logical thought or structured thought, structured analysis, analytical philosophy, we're talking about laws that govern correct thinking. Step outside those laws and your thinking is not correct. You're thinking wrongly, and you're likely to arrive at wrong answers. So we're going to have to do a little bit of logic here today. The laws of thought based on necessary rudiments of truth. Now, we'll describe, there are only three basic laws of logic. The law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of inference. I'm really drawing blanks here. I should have these things memorized. I'm just drawing blanks. Let's just talk about the law of identity. The law of identity, simply stated, is A equals A. It cannot get much simpler. Remember, these are rudiments of basic truth that you can't get any lower than. A equals A. Whatever A is, it's equal to itself. It's the law of identity. The law of non-contradiction says A cannot equal B unless it does. In other words, A cannot equal something that is not itself. It cannot be equal. It can be similar. It can't be equal. So 2 does not equal 4. They're both numbers, but it's not identical, right? But if you say 2 is equal to 4, you're contradicting yourself. That's an impossibility. It's a basic rudiment of thought, right? So these are some examples of just the basic ideas behind logic. All logic is built on these simple truths. The thing about logic is that it is as real as the laws of nature. Now, physicalists, metaphysical materialists, metaphysical naturalists, scientismists, kind of overlapping names for very similar things, operate on the principle that the only thing that's real is what can be described in the language of chemistry and physics. If you cannot describe it in the language of chemistry and physics, it does not actually exist. It's a myth. It's a social construct. But that's not true. We've already talked about non-material reality, your own mind, your own consciousness, your awareness of the weather outside right now. Not the weather itself, but your mental awareness of it is a real thing. If it isn't, you're out of your mind. If you actually think there's a snowstorm going on out there, you're crazy. No other word for it. Clinically, it's called delusion. You're in a state of delusion. Because your mind, which is very real, isn't working right. Okay. In fact, the laws of logic are as important as, and possibly even more important than the laws of science, because the laws of science are built on logic. The greater is logic, the lesser is science, which is built on top of it. Yes, sir?
Gotten to point 3 yet?
No,
I have identity and non-contradiction.
I didn't, I forgot the other one.
All right.
I'm still like trying to
I'm sorry.
pull that up. But my point here is that logic is important. It is an important tool of determining truth. Okay, science is too, but just because it can't be scientifically proven doesn't mean it can't be proven. We go through life working on logic and making decisions towards truth all the time. You do it every day. It's not scientific for me to think there's a sale in Walmart on beef. That's a joke. I'm going to go down there today and buy it. That's pure logic. I want it. I'm going to go down there and buy it. It's there. It really exists. I'm going to go get it. There's nothing scientific about that. It's just logic. I want it. I can go get it. I will go get it. Right? Very simple stuff. It's rudimentary. Can you prove that God exists? Well, science can only proceed on the laws of logic, so the conclusion of logic must necessarily have equal value to science. Okay, I want to establish that in your mind. And it's possible that actually the laws of logic are even more important. But they must at least be necessarily equal. If I can prove it logically, what that means is my proof is as good as scientific proof because my method, logic, is equally valid as science. In fact, science is built on top of logic. So try to get a scientist to do science without using logic.
Yeah.
Try to speak a sentence without using logic. Just one. You can't think without logic. It's that rudimentary. I think it's very telling that God chose to inspire the Apostle John to call the Lord Jesus Christ the Word, translation of the word logos, which is the Greek word for logic. Like I said yesterday, you don't have to become Spock and get all weird. It's just, God is talking about an order of reality that became manifest, it became incarnated in the Lord Jesus Christ. Can you prove to me that God exists? Yes, I can, because there are logical arguments that conclude with the reality of God. And those logical arguments are as valid as scientific arguments. When you understand that we're talking about the God of the Bible and what the God of the Bible describes, that's what I can prove. You want to want me to prove that Krishna exists? I have no idea. It's not my thing. I don't know anything about that. Well, I do know some stuff about it, but that's not my point. So these arguments have been understood. The arguments I'm going to show you have been understood for thousands of years. Philosophers, theologians have used them. Western civilization has abandoned them, but that doesn't mean they're not true. A logical argument is a series of true statements that lead to a necessarily true conclusion. That's the form of what's called deductive logic. You don't have to know that, just think logic. And what that means is A is true and B is true, therefore C is true. It's putting together two thoughts to arrive at a third thought. And in deductive logic, if A and B are true, then C is necessarily true. It's a steel door of truth. It's like you cannot escape it, right? Let me give you an example. All rectangles have 4 and only 4 90-degree angles, right? That's an observable characteristic of geometry. This screen right here has 4 and only 4 90-degree angles. Therefore, this screen is a rectangle. You see how basic this is? That's basic logic. But it's a simple example of what can be a more complex problem. This is saying, this is true, all rectangles that's how they're defined, 4 90-degree angles. This screen matches that description perfectly. Therefore, this screen is a rectangle. It's a necessary conclusion. You could not say rectangles have that shape, this has that shape, therefore this is a circle. You're delusional, right? People who think that way get medication. All right, we can apply the same basic idea to proving God. Some of the logical arguments are what we just talked about, the ontological argument, the moral argument, cosmological argument. We didn't actually talk about the ontological, and also the prophetic argument. So I'm going to speed through some of these, because we've already talked about that. The ontological argument you haven't heard. This is new. God is necessarily the greatest being that can be imagined and must at least exist in our minds. Even if it's not true, to imagine God, by definition, you are imagining what people would call the supreme being, the highest thing you can imagine, right? Step two, that which actually exists is infinitely superior to that which doesn't actually exist, right? Things that exist are like a grain of sand is infinitely superior to nothingness. It's not just a little superior because it's only a grain of sand. Nothingness is infinitely less than the grain of sand, right? So God exists. It's got to be the highest thing that can exist in your mind. If that's not what you're thinking of, you're not thinking of God. You think there's something less than God. Go up the game. Talk about the highest possible being. That's God. But that which actually exists must necessarily be superior to that which doesn't exist. Therefore, God exists. You see that? Not a particularly strong argument, but it's one of the classical five. Philosophers have pulled it apart for years. Other people say, nope, they haven't succeeded because it's been in debate ever since. But if God only exists in your mind, then he's not really real. And therefore, he's not really God. Because God must exist to be superior to what's in your mind. So kind of a weird philosophical argument. We talked about the moral argument. All moral law is observed in all cultures universally. God claims to be the source of moral law. There is no other cause of moral law. Now, some people say there are natural causes, which are like, Darwinists would say they convey survival advantage for us to not kill our own babies. Okay, but is it okay then to just torture them?
Well, look at Molech.
Yeah, well, they were sacrificing their babies because they had value. It's also a great way to do birth control when there's no such thing as birth control. There is no other cause of moral law, so therefore God must exist. Yeah, God's the one that claims to be that. Hello, moral law, me, I created it. It's real, and there's nobody else making the claim. Now, like I said, naturalists will attribute moral law, but they're not actually doing moral law. They're just doing variations on moral law. There's still a moral law. They know in their heart of hearts that, eating their little girl's face while she's screaming to death is bad. Now, maybe killing other people's children is acceptable in your tribe. But killing your children, that's bad. Right? So the principle of moral law is what we're talking about, not examples. There are many examples. There are some counterexamples. Can you prove to me that God exists? Cosmological argument. We already talked about this. That which begins to exist necessarily has a cause. That which caused the universe to exist is rightly called God, or identified as God. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe had a cause. Therefore, God exists. It's a little more complex, but it's a chain of logical statements, each of which is true. That which exists necessarily has a cause. Absolute truth. That which caused the universe to exist is rightly called God. The Bible identifies God as the creator over and over again. The heavens declare the glory of God. God created the heavens and the earth. Behold, I and I alone created the heavens and the earth. That's one of the things that distinguishes the God of the Bible, is he's constantly reminding us that he created it. The universe began to exist. He's the one who claimed to exist, caused it to exist. Definitely had a cause, because it didn't come out of nothing. I mean, it came out of nothing, but not without a cause. Can you prove that God exists? How about the prophetic argument? Only a supreme supernatural being outside of time can know and communicate with us, that's important, about events in the future. Somebody who has a point of view outside of time. They can see the future as if it's the present. God accurately does communicate with us in the Bible about unknown things that are unknown to us. Not only about the future, but also about the ancient past. Things that he told us were true in the past, we've gone forward and forgotten about. Then we look back and find out, oh yeah, it is true. But there's also the prophetic, looking forward. God says this is going to happen in the future. The Bible has thousands of prophecies As we talked about yesterday, there are 325 fulfilled prophecies about Jesus. Absolutely impossible to anticipate those details from the natural mind. You can't even tell me what's going to happen in this town next week. Here we had Isaiah telling us how the Messiah was going to be executed. Between 700 and 800 years before it happened. 700 and 800 years doesn't sound like much. The United States of America has existed for less than half of it. God actually communicates with us. So somebody is communicating that, and if you are outside of time communicating the details about the future, you're probably a god. Said Jeff Foxworth. There are other arguments. There's the argument from design. We talked about that. The argument, the anthropic argument, which is a variation of the design argument, says that human beings were designed. And more specifically, the universe appears to have been designed to support human life, at least our local universe, our planet. This planet seems to be ideally suited for human life. There's the prime mover, that's a cosmological argument. The necessary being is another kind of cosmological argument. The fine-tuning argument, this is the one that one of my teachers, Gary Habermas, used in his famous debate with the Pope of the Atheists at the time, Dr. Anthony Flew, the head of the Oxford Philosophy Department. And they held the debate. They were friends. They'd been friends for many years. But my friends, let me tell you about this debate. Because at this level of the academy, if you enter a debate and you lose, you must alter your views. In other words, you can't say, well, he won, but I'm still right. You have just proven that you do not abide by the process that you advocate for. Because you're advocating for the process of rational dialectic that says we can arrive at truth by determining truth based on facts, logic, reasoning. When the reasoning has been shown to be against you, and you say, well, I still won. See, you're worried about your ego more than you are about the truth. And you just have lost all your credibility. Nobody's going to publish your stuff ever again because you've just proven that you don't even believe it. You're a faker, a liar, a phony, a fraud. Anthony Flew is no fraud. He's a serious, very capable philosopher. He could think clearly. He was good at it. So he goes into this debate. Here's the lineup. The existence of God, right? Over in this corner, Anthony Flew, famous Oxford professor. Now over in this corner, Gary Habermas, head of the philosophy department at Liberty University and also teaches at Biola University. They're going to just debate the existence of God. And there's going to be 5 judges, each of whom have 100 points to allocate. There's a total of 500 points that will determine, the outcome of the debate. Whoever gets the most points wins. They hold their debate, and the argument that Gary Habermas used several, but the one that worked, I guess I've just given it away who won, was the argument of fine-tuning. The universe is so finely tuned that it could not possibly have not been designed. For example, take a proton. You know how the atom is made up? You got protons, neutrons, electrons. If the material weight of a proton was 0.1% less than it is, all matter in the entire universe would cease to exist. It would be so out of balance that it would fly, matter would decompose. There could be no matter. There can be no matter, there can't be any life. You are a material being, in part. You have a physical body. That's one example. There are thousands of examples like that. Things that scientists have determined. If you change it, if the moon was like a tenth further away than it is now, the gravitational fields on the Earth would be totally different, and what they call evolution could not have happened. Because the gravitational fields govern the accumulation of matter, like cells, and their ability to hold together. So, like, again, you lose. If any of these goes wrong, you lose the whole package. If more than one goes wrong, you lose the whole package right away. So you see, it's a very important point. The outcome of the debate was it was a massacre. The 5 PhD judges, all impartial, clear, critical thinkers, philosophers, guys who do not play games with favoritism and stuff, they are committed to the rational process, awarded 450 points to Dr. Habermas and 50 points Anthony Flew, one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century. It was a massacre. Anthony Flew, subsequently abiding by the agreement, published a series of articles in professional journals saying why he's no longer an atheist. He had to retain his credibility just as a decent individual, an honest man. So, yeah, can you prove that God exists? Well, it was proved to Anthony Flew. He was for a long time what I call the Pope of the atheists.
Did he become a Christian?
He did not become a Christian, he became a deist, which is someone who believes that God is real, but it hasn't been proven to me that he interacts with us. And he died before he could get that far. So can you prove God exists? Yeah, we can prove God exists. Since we can prove the reality of God, what does that mean to you? Remember that second question, like what we accept as proof and what's it going to do? So this is where that comes in. You said that if I could prove God is real, you would begin to seriously look into the other things I'm telling you about God. Okay, fair enough. Or you said you would think about it. Okay, well, think about it then, because you just had that question answered, you see. So don't let that stop you from going further. Be honest with yourself, be honest with the conclusions we've reached together, and move forward. You owe it to yourself. Most atheists and agnostics, as it turns out, just don't even really care what your arguments prove. They just don't want to believe. And there's a variety of reasons, or actually causes, and sometimes reasons, for why they won't believe. Those things exist. But it doesn't matter, no matter how well you do with this, most of the time they're just going to walk away. They'll say, well, yeah, what will it mean to me? It'll make me want to look into it a little more. But they won't. Only the very honest person will do that. And those kind of people are vanishingly rare. The honest person would follow through and go, okay, I see I'm going to have to bone up on this a little bit. Most atheists and agnostics just don't really care. And that's because most of them are irrational. You see, what you've done is you've tried to give rational arguments to people who pretend to be rational, but they're actually not. There's usually other reasons why they don't want to believe. It has nothing to do with their intellectual problems. We'll talk about those in another class. All right. We have one last session to go through here. I'm really sorry we're having to jam these all together like this. It's just limited time. It seems like there's never enough time to get through these things. Jesus. Okay. What's the deal with Jesus? This is an interesting thing. There's a lot of interesting things about Jesus. But one is, to Muslims, Jesus was a prophet, a valid, honest-to-goodness prophet. To the Jews, Jesus was, at best, a rabbi. Orthodox Jews kind of hate Jesus. They think he's a magician, a bad guy magician, faker, parlor trick, phony. To the Hindus, he's what's called an avatar, a manifestation of one of their deities. Buddhists call him a Buddha, or an enlightened person. He achieved enlightenment. The Wiccans say that Jesus was a magician or a witch. To the Aetherians, thinking, what's an Aetherian? It's a UFO cult. The Aetherians say that Jesus was a spaceman, a highly evolved spaceman who came down to Earth on a UFO. To spiritualists, that's the table lifters and crystal ball gazers, and there is an actual spiritualism, which is a Christian cult. They actually follow Jesus because they think he was a medium, a trance medium, getting messages from beyond. Oops. Oh, don't worry, we still got a couple more to go. To the Rastafarians, Jesus was a Rastaman, a holy man, in a tradition that's Rastafarians are kind of a combination of Hinduism, African religion, and Christianity, kind of mixed together, very syncretic. We're not going to go into a lot of the details on all of those. It would take far too long. But here's the one I want to talk about, because this is the biggest problem for us today in America. To the modern leftist theologians, Jesus was a religious revolutionary. We're going to see that in a minute. Notice a pattern here, though. To every one of these people, these groups of people, and in fact there are many more, but it's true of all of them, they all try to make Jesus look like them. To the Rastafarians, he's a Rastaman. To the spiritualists, he's a medium, right? To the Hindus, he's an avatar. The Buddhists say he was a Buddha. They're all saying Jesus is one of ours. Isn't it interesting? As a Christian, when did you try to claim a foreign God as yours? Or do you feel any obligation to have any account for them? No. You can live your entire Christian life and never even know they exist, never even hear about them. And you're fine. But for some reason, all these religions all over the world have to have something to say about Jesus. They say, no, he's one of ours, he's one of ours. That tells me a lot. I mean, there's a lot packed in there. One is the value of Jesus, even to those who deny him. The leftist theologians of our time have turned him into a revolutionary, a religious revolutionary, and a social revolutionary for that matter. Again, we'll be looking into that. So what's the deal with Jesus, right? Why is that? Why is it that everybody seems to think he's that important? Why him? There are Buddhists in America, but we don't all go around celebrating Buddhist holidays. I mean, Buddhists do, but for some reason they will actually celebrate Christmas. It's just kind of weird. So, what's the deal with Jesus? So, why should somebody follow Jesus? It's a good question. That's what we're advocating people do. We're saying you should submit your life to the Lord Jesus Christ. You're a sinner, you need to be saved, or you're going to hell. And Jesus is here to save you. You're already doomed, by the way, John 3:17. He's throwing you a lifeline, and you need to grab it. And I love you, my friend. I want you to not have to face that terrible fate. Well, often a response is, well, Jesus was just a fill in the blank. Don't you love that term, just a? Oh, he's just a. See, it's a minimizing term. Well, he was nothing more than. He was just a good teacher, a good man. He was a fraud. He was a faker. He was a myth. He was a magician. He's just a magician. I mean, people say that. It's a way of dismissing him and getting rid of him. Now, can you prove that? Why is it that I'm always the one who has to prove everything? Can you prove to me that Jesus was just a magician? No, they can't. They saw it on an internet site somewhere, and they adopted it because it helps protect them from Christianity. They use it to insulate themselves. No, I don't have to deal with Jesus because he was just a fill in the blank. Interestingly, like I said, everyone seems to have their own explanation for Jesus. Where do they get their ideas about Jesus? Well, it could come from all kinds of places, but ultimately, where it ends up is themselves. They have adopted these ideas and they take them as true. It doesn't matter if they've done any research. It doesn't matter if they've ever opened a Bible. They just get these ideas. They saw it in a Time magazine article or on an internet web page, or saw some guy on TV going blah, blah, blah. Usually around Easter and Christmas time, when the mainstream media starts putting all this phony Jesus stuff out. How did that happen? Where do these ideas come from? Well, I have what I call the trickle-down theory. They usually start in academia. Scholars, liberal scholars from our mainstream universities publish books and journal articles and theological journals and all this stuff, always looking to debunk Jesus. I think the head of the Harvard Divinity School is an atheist. Do the math on that.
Princeton, too.
Yeah, maybe it was Princeton I was thinking of. Harvard was actually started as a Christian university. Today they are militantly anti-Christian. Remember how we were talking about yesterday, how we lost all the universities, we've lost the levers of influence in the United States? Well, the universities is one of them, and that's where these ideas come from. From academia, it trickles down into the mainstream media. You get the talking heads, the experts on TV shows. Well, Jesus was just we have evidence that Jesus, and they have these weird theories. Their evidence is incredibly thin, if they have any at all, Their arguments are usually terrible. That is, they don't follow the rules of logic. They just kind of assert ideas and speculate and infer from certain things theories from other theories instead of arriving at truth from facts. Big difference. You can sound intelligent and still talk like an idiot. I know, I went to college for a bunch of years. I can talk for hours without saying anything if I want to. You want to see it? No, you don't want to see it. So it starts in academia, it filters into the media, and there it gets picked up by the masses. And what we have is things like the Da Vinci Code, which people actually thought was true. I mean, literally, people were reading the Da Vinci Code and go, I didn't know that the Council of Nicaea established the canon of the Bible. The reason why you didn't know that is because that was never a part of the Council of Nicaea. It had nothing to do with it. They just, and Jesus was married and had children. Okay, let's see the evidence, and it's just speculation. It's usually guesswork. There's no meat on those bones. It's all confusing. It just leaves people in a state of confusion. We get the popular myth. That's where it all comes down to, and that's where most people pick it up. So it starts in the ivory towers, comes down through the media, trickles down, and then trickles down through the media to the masses, and the masses pack them. I saw a guy on CNN, and he was like a theologian and everything, and he was saying that Jesus never totally existed. Okay. But he was on CNN. Yeah, well, born and raised. What can I tell you?
Deer hunting with Jesus.
Yeah. And the one in the upper left corner there is the gay Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
We've got the gay Jesus now. There actually is a gay Jesus cult. It's a bunch of homosexuals who say that Jesus was gay. Remember how everybody tries to make Jesus into one of theirs? Weird, isn't it? Why is that? It's because they recognize there's something there that they need to justify themselves against. They intuitively recognize it, so everybody's trying to make claims on it. All right, we're going to look at something called the historical Jesus, and we're going to look at the trilemma, and we're going to look at the resurrection and what that proves, okay? The historical Jesus. There he is. That's a picture of him, photograph. We sent back the camera, back in the time machine. Got a picture. It's not a very good picture. The camera turned into a bad camera when we sent it back in time.
Can you
Anyway,
go back one slide?
going backwards.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
This is just like a table.
Just as you changed it.
Yeah, this is just like a table of contents. These are the things we're going to be talking about.
Right,
So
okay.
this isn't really all.
Okay.
Okay, the first quest. There's this thing called the three historical quests, or the three quests for the historical Jesus. These are periods of time in which Western theologians, Christian theologians, began to debunk Christianity. At least they thought they would. They thought they would, thought they were making a name for themselves. So the first quest was in the 18th and into the 19th century. It would be the 17 into the 1800s. And it begins with something called German liberalism. These movements started in Germany, but they very quickly spread throughout Europe and came over to the United States. The basic idea was from a guy named Schleiermacher. He published a book called On Religion. And in that, he denies the inspiration of the Bible, but he accepts the historical veracity of the New Testament. So he's saying, as a historical document, this is telling the truth about historical things. But it's not divinely inspired. It was just people kind of telling the story. Well, in a way, that works for us. Because now people who don't want to believe that God inspired the Bible, we've got a major theologian on their side saying it's historically accurate. Well, the historical facts are important. He also accepted the moral teachings of Jesus. That is, Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, for example. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. The teachings against adultery and stuff. He accepted those as valid moral reality. Never thought to ask himself, who's the moral lawgiver? We got moral law. And he probably believed in God. But, he wasn't like putting two and two together here. These are very intelligent guys, but they kind of get weird. There's Hermann Ramarius, and a guy named Adolf Harnack. These are other advocates of this kind of view. They started looking, they were the beginners. He's saying, let's just kind of brush aside all the mythology and religious stuff, and let's get down to the truth the real historical Jesus. Notice the anti-supernaturalism. The real truth is just purely natural. The metaphysical naturalism is what that's called. That's how you get to the truth, is by doing away with all this subjective stuff. So that was the beginning of it. The second quest came along in the 1950s. And really, probably the biggest guy in this is a guy named Rudolf Bultmann. He said that said of the Bible, the aim of form criticism is to determine the original form of a piece of narrative. Dominical sayings or a parable. In the process, we learn to distinguish secondary additions and forms, and these in turn lead to important results for the history of the tradition. Again, we're going to do away with all that supernatural stuff because, you know, that may or may not be true. We're just concentrating on the real thing. That's the history. Again, anti-supernaturalism, anti-pure materialism, if you will, so on. So he did say he was seeking for the universal truths that were merely reflected in Christianity. So Bultmann was this German Lutheran theologian. He's a professor of the New Testament at the University of Marburg. He was convinced that the narratives of the life of Jesus were offering theology in story form, as if like the whole New Testament is a parable. Right? What Jesus did with parables, he was saying that's what the Bible does with everything that it teaches. It's not really true, but it has meaning that's true. And to this day, there are a lot of people who think that way. He was convinced that the narratives of the life of Jesus were offering theology in form. Like the Gospels were just a parable. They weren't actually historical truth. They were just a parable. So it's interesting because this is part of a historical quest. He's basically denying history. He attributed Christianity to pagan sources, and this is something that was picked up in what's called the Verd-Bosset thesis. Two other theologians came along and said, the whole Christian myth is really an assemblage of myths from other religions. Jesus has never really existed. He's a fictional character who's a composite of all these other hero figures from Mithraism and the Roman pagan religion and the Greek pagan religion and who knows what else. But he did accept the moral teachings of Jesus. So he couldn't go, he can reject Jesus, but he can't reject those teachings because now he's in trouble. He's a Lutheran pastor. And he knows, you to reject the moral teaching of Jesus, you reject the morality upon which all of Western civilization was built. So, good luck. You can inspire chaos like crazy.
Well, isn't that what the world's doing right now?
That's exactly what the world's doing right now. And look at the chaos
Yeah.
that's emerging. Okay, the third and final quest, my favorite, 1970s, the Jesus Seminar. These guys are a joke. They're going to return to a historical Jesus. They're going to say, well, he's a wise man in first century Palestine. Not Israel. They're going to call it Palestine. It didn't exist. Accepts some of the moral and political and social teachings of Jesus. These are the guys who think Jesus is a religious and social revolutionary. Okay? Wait until you hear about that. They also, like their predecessors, Bultmann and his generation, continue to deny the supernatural implications of the Bible. So no, that's just not real. Right? There's no supernaturalism. That's all just myth. The Bible's lying about that stuff. Or at least they were delusional. Okay, who are these guys? Well, the Jesus Seminar was 74 theologians. Almost all of them American. Well, theologians and others, wait till you hear. Leading the pack was a guy named Robert Funk, another guy named John Dominic Crossan, and Marcus Borg. There were 71 others. Of them, only 14, of the 74, only 14 had serious qualifications as biblical scholars. The rest of them were like amateur scholars, and like just amateurs, like Paul Verhoeven. Did you ever see RoboCop? He directed it. Paul Verhoeven was a Hollywood movie director, and he was voting in the Jesus Seminar, determining what sayings of Jesus were true. He had no qualifications. Maybe he went to Bible school when he was a kid or something. He's not a serious scholar at all, not even close. More than half of the 74 so-called scholars had only published a few journal articles in their careers. 18 of them never published anything. No peer-reviewed publications at all. No academic credential at all. 36 got their degrees from 3 universities, all of them militantly leftist universities who were already buying into the Bultmann line and the previous historical Jesus. You think this is a biased group? You think they maybe assembled a group that was going to vote a certain way? It's pretty obvious. 36 of them got their degrees from those 3 universities. And I mean, that alone disqualifies the whole thing. That's, over half. The majority of the Jesus Seminar members, their only teaching posts were at community colleges. They weren't even like real teachers. They weren't real professors. They were amateurs. I don't mean to, diss community colleges. I think they serve a great service, but being leaders of theology doesn't count. You're a cut above high school. Right? You're not even like at undergraduate level. So William Lane Craig, happy to say, is one of my teachers. He's actually one of the lecturers that was at Biola when I was there. He did some of the classes. He was like a guest lecturer. He pointed out a couple things. One, the presuppositions of scientific naturalism run throughout the whole thing. They're all already bought into no supernaturalism. The Bible is all just natural stuff, and that which appears to be supernatural is myth. Don't take it seriously. Miracles, yeah, whatever. They just brush that all aside.
And what is that term called again?
The scientific naturalism.
Scientific naturalism.
Yeah. It's a worldview. Basically says, the natural world that can be described by the language of physics and chemistry is what is reality. Nothing else really exists. He also pointed out that the primacy, they put primal value on the apocryphal Gospels. Their primary authority was higher than what was in the Bible. It was like the Gospel of Peter and the Gospel of Thomas and all these Gospels, which came 200 and 300 and 400 years after Jesus. They're all fake. They'd say Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas was written 100 years after Thomas was dead. Right. It wasn't the Gospel of Thomas. It's a work of fiction.
We were talking about Apocrypha just a little while ago.
Yeah.
And how, the Maccabees, things like that, were historical documents.
Right. Yeah, they weren't Gospels.
Yeah, but they were not any authoritative anything.
Right.
And that's why they came out. But they weren't heretical.
Right.
Those things that you're talking about.
They're heretical.
They're heretical.
Yeah. The Gospel of Thomas talks about a 90-foot Jesus when he came out of his tomb. He's really big. Finally, one of the things that drove their thinking was the necessity of a politically correct Jesus. Now, who are these guys? Most of them were a bunch of Berkeley hippies back in the 60s. Remember that piece about people creating a Jesus that looks like them? Mm-hmm. What you have in the Jesus Seminar is a bunch of political liberals trying to recreate Christianity in their own image. And half of them had no qualifications. Those who had qualifications were biased, obviously biased. So the way they operated was they went through the sayings of Jesus, and they had colored beads that they would put into a bowl, and then they would count the beads. And if the beads are red, it means we believe Jesus said this, and all the way down to I think black was the bottom color, said he didn't say it at all, no possibility he said that. And then gray's in between, like he might have said it, he probably said it, these in-betweens. Well, you've got a bunch of guys, I could assemble a team of people from Calvary Chapel and say, we're all going to vote on whether we think Jesus is truly God in a bod. Okay? What do you think the outcome of that's going to be? You think it's going to look like Calvary Chapel? I think so. That's what they did. They got a bunch of these people together who were incredibly biased, also totally unqualified, a high percentage of them, and then got them to vote together on what they thought, and then now the world takes them seriously. It was a bunch of scholars in it, 74 scholars, and they called themselves the Jesus Seminar. Wow. The world was impressed as heck by that. People think it's incredibly powerful. It's nonsense. There's some other explanations out there that people have tried. And it's going to be hard for you to see these, so I can't really blow them up, but I'll just describe them to you. There's the Horus myth, the Attis myth, the Mithra myth, the Krishna myth, and the Dionysius myth, and the Jesus myth. And all of them have some common characteristics. They all have virgin births. They all have, not all, some of them have dead, dying, and rising saviors, like Mithra. And other characteristics of Christianity. And it's this that caused people to come up with this composite character thing. Now, you can see this in a film on the internet. It's called Zeitgeist. And the whole film is about how Jesus never existed, and he's really a composite character in literature of all these things. Well, hold on a second. It turns out that, yeah, there are these similarities. Sort of. The problem is they have they've committed a logical fallacy called false inference. It's a false cause. Because these two are similar, one caused the other. So you take Mithraism, for example, one of the mainstream religions of ancient Rome. Mithraism existed before Christianity, and Mithraism has their God figure, dying and being resurrected and being virgin born. Oh no! But wait. Mithraism borrowed the idea from Christianity and applied it to late Mithraism. Early Mithraism did not have those things. The Mithraists and the Christians were living in Rome together, religious ideas mixed together, and the Mithraists said, hey, that sounds good. And they reapplied it to their myth. You see? So people say, well, Christianity was based on Mithraism. No, actually, it's kind of the other way around. The Christ-like doctrines of Mithraism didn't appear until after the Christian church was well established. The fact that they're similar doesn't mean one caused it. It may mean one caused the other, but you have the cause go in the wrong direction, right? Some of these things are way overstated, like the myth of Horus. Yes, Horus was resurrected in a sense. The myth of Horus is an Egyptian god. His body was chopped up into pieces, and somebody went and got them and put them back together out of the Nile River, and they brought him back to life. Okay, not exactly a resurrection, certainly not a resurrection like what we have.
Reconstruction.
Yeah, they rebuilt their god. And it goes on and on. In all of these cases, while people will see these claims on the internet, they go, oh my gosh, Christianity it's all bogus because it's based on this or that other religion. No, usually it's a distortion of the other religion. They're not stating it correctly, they're at least not giving you the details, or the cause-effect relationship is reversed. Other religions borrowed from Christianity. This is a thing in religious studies called syncretism, the blending of religious ideas. It happens all over the world among all religions. All religions have syncretic groups around them. It's normal, it's just what happens. It's human nature to try to say, they're kind of like, you be nice to them and say, what they're trying to do is find a common truth. And so they kind of tweak this and borrow from that, and they kind of squeeze them together. See, it's all one big religion. We're all just one big happy family. All religions are really teaching the same thing. Coexist, yeah. So that's just a deep dive into the composite thing.
The Mormons in Utah, they keep having these big seminars where they invite all religions to come, and
just like the Catholics.
Yeah.
And the Roman,
the Catholics are going to these ones in Utah. Well, it's like
and the Mormon Pope the Mormon prophet has gone to hang out with the Pope.
Yeah.
Right,
incredible.
Kind of a pan schemic look at the historical Jesus. And it's just some characters, some representative characters. All the way over on the extreme leftist side is this guy, Harold Attridge, who basically said that Jesus was a peasant sage. All the way over to the right-hand side, you have N.T. Wright, New Testament scholar, NT, New Testament. I thought that was amusing, but that's his name. These are his initials. And in between, you have this gradation of scholarship that basically go from basically atheist all the way to traditional mainstream historical biblical orthodoxy. Now we're going to look at the testimony of history. Since we're talking about the historical Jesus, let's see what the actual facts of history are about Jesus. What are our sources? Well, the Bible, Old Testament prophecy, and New Testament history. Old Testament looks forward towards Christ, New Testament looks backward towards him. Early Christian sources, the early church fathers, copious writers, it proves volumes and volumes of books. The first generation of the early church fathers learned their Christianity from John and Paul and Peter. They didn't come from nowhere. They got converted and were in the churches led by these guys and established by these guys. There's 17 external sources that historians use. That is, external meaning non-biblical. Documents written by other people that give us some details about the life of Jesus. 12 of those sources record details about his death. 50% of them call Jesus deity, or claim that Christians called him deity. And 60 historical facts about Jesus have been established from sources outside the New Testament. Jesus was a real guy, you see. That's the point. When you have people from different points of view all talking about the same guy, you can be sure he existed. So this business about Jesus not existing, he's really a myth from composite of characters from different religious literature. Well, they haven't confronted this stuff. They haven't confronted the actual facts of history. Jesus really was a real guy. People really did think he was God. Now, those historical sources don't say he was God. Some of them kind of do. They imply it. But they really do say that the Christians worshipped him as God. Kind of a problem for our Jehovah's Witness friends. Let's have a look at some of those examples. Pliny the Younger lived between 62 and 113 AD. He wrote to Trajan, the emperor. See, Pliny had decided to kill a bunch of Christians because they were creating problems for him. Rome survived on loyalty to the civil government. You had to be loyal to Rome to be a Roman citizen, and if you weren't, you were probably a slave. If you weren't a slave or a citizen, you're kind of like this in-between ground, but you're not really welcome there. You got to get out of town. And you can be there, but you're not really allowed to be part of the country. The emperors had discovered that religion is one of the things that causes human cohesion. It causes communities to form. Whether it's true, false, right, or wrong, religion brings people, it's something around which people can unite. It creates a strong bond of unity. So they started claiming, well, you have to worship the emperor. The emperor is a god. That wasn't always true in Rome, but in relatively late times that became true. And the Christians wouldn't do it. Now, you could be a Christian. You're allowed to be a Christian at a certain point in time. And even when persecutions were going on, they weren't universal necessarily. Sometimes they weren't. You could be a Christian just so long as you swore allegiance to the emperor as a god. You can worship Jesus, but you also have to at least acknowledge that there's this other god. Right? That's how the legal system worked there. Well, the Christians wouldn't do it, so Pliny was like, okay, he killed him. But he wasn't sure if he did the right thing. So he wrote to Trajan and he said, if they persevered in their confession as Christians, I ordered them to be executed. For I did not doubt, but let their confession be any sort whatsoever, this positiveness and inflexible obstinacy deserved to be punished. And Trajan wrote back and said, no, you did the right thing. Killing them was the right thing, because they might have been dissenters. They might have been insurrectionists. They could have caused trouble. What does this prove? Well, it proves that Pliny knew that Christians had been around there in the first century. Where did they come from? They seem to think they came from Jesus. And this is, remember, at a time when the people who were alive in Jesus' day, including those who were witnesses to his many miracles and his reputation had spread throughout all of Judea and most of Israel and beyond. You had living witnesses who were going, no, I'm going with him. I'm willing to die for it. Let's look at another one. Tacitus. We talked about Tacitus yesterday, about how he is the main source for the history of Rome, the ancient Rome. And he wrote that Nero burned the city of Rome and blamed the Christians. We've all heard that story, right? Well, how could Nero blame Jesus if he didn't exist? That would have made him look like an idiot. He was an idiot, but that would have made things even worse. And then he persecuted the Christians terribly. This is the guy who, would have an orgy in his garden and would have Christians hung out on posts and soak them in oil and light them on fire, and they'd all have sex to the screaming, burning people. We're talking some serious evil. We're talking demonic evil. Right? Little proof of some supernaturalism there. So Nero's actions and Tacitus' record of his actions are external witnesses to the reality of Jesus. He was a real guy. The idea that Jesus didn't exist is a historical bit of lunacy. Lucian, he claimed that Christians, let me read to you what he wrote. It's kind of a patchwork because it's a long passage. I'm just going to assemble a part of it. The Christians worship a man to this day. The distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites was crucified on that account. It was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment that they are converted, and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws. Gee, it sounds just like Christians. It sounds just like what Jesus taught. Where did he get that stuff? Maybe he got it from Christians and they were all just making it up. Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people all just kind of making up a story. In a time when there were, not millions, but hundreds of thousands who would have known better, and yet the myth survived. Not possible. Not possible. I'm not going to bother reading all that. We're kind of running out of time here. It's just another testimony from Tacitus. Then there's Josephus, everybody's favorite, because Josephus talks very clearly about Jesus. Now, we have to be careful with Josephus, though, because the Testimonium Flavinium, that portion of Josephus' history of the Jews that talks about Jesus, some part of it has been amended. Scholars generally agree that where it talks about Jesus being resurrected was an addition that was made later. Josephus didn't write those words, somebody else did. It's a corrupted text. Nevertheless, he does testify about Jesus claiming to be the Messiah, and he acknowledged that Jesus was a real person. He said this goes in and out. Josephus is writing a history of the Jews for the Romans. He's a Roman citizen who was a Jew, and he was basically, I think he'd been appointed to document the history of Judea and Israel and hand it over to the Romans. So, he basically acknowledged that Jesus was a real guy. We get to the Jews. The rabbinic writings, the Talmud, has a lot to say about Jesus. The rabbis wrote, first of all, to defend themselves against Christian claims. The Christians were saying that Sanhedrin had abused their power. They had executed a man who was not guilty of anything. And they wrote to defend themselves against that. One of those forms is Mary was claimed in the Talmud to have had Jesus illegitimate. They called Jesus the son of Pantera. Pantera, interestingly, was a Roman soldier who seduced Mary. No proof he ever actually existed, and interestingly, the word Pantera equals virgin. There seems to have been a pun in this. Pantheros, the son of Panthera, was a pun. It means the son of a virgin. It's like they were poking fun. The Jews were poking fun of this. And their name for Mary was Stada, which means unfaithful, as in adulteress. So their idea was Jesus was real, but he came from sexual procreation between Mary and a Roman soldier who seduced her. Now, they couldn't say that about Jesus if he didn't exist. They're admitting that he existed. They're just trying to explain it away. In the Talmud, there's the Tosefta Helene 222 says there's a testimony of Jacob, a man named Jacob, came to heal him, another guy, in the name of Jesus, the son of Pantera. Somebody came to heal somebody in the name of this heretic Jesus. Babylonian Talmud is an example of something that comes along later. It's like 3rd century, so it has less authority. It talks about Jesus and his followers being sent to hell for their heresy. Can't somebody send somebody to hell who doesn't exist? They wouldn't even try. They wouldn't talk about it. Would you talk about sending somebody to hell if they didn't exist? It wouldn't make any sense. Sanhedrin 43a relates the trial and execution of a sorcerer named Yeshu, Hebrew word for Jesus, and his 5 disciples. The sorcerer was stoned and hanged on the eve of Passover. And back to the Tosefta Hulin 222, Jacob came to heal. I already mentioned that. That same Tosefta says that he told me of a world of heresy in the name of Jesus, the son of Pantera. Babylonian Talmud, thus I was taught, a person was saying thus, talking about some other stuff, he said, I was taught by Jesus of Nazareth. There's plenty of testimony in the writings of the enemies of Christianity to confirm that he existed. They couldn't be his enemy if he didn't exist. So the historical evidence for Jesus is quite strong. So we know Jesus existed and we know his claims. And now we're going to come up with a little thing called the trilemma. Some of you have heard this before, and it looks like this. Jesus claimed to be God. And people say, well, he never said, I am God. Logical fallacy, argument from silence. You're right. He never said those exact words. Your argument is meaningless, however, because he said it in other ways. Before Abraham was, I am. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? Son of Man was a messianic title of deity, because it's talking about the God who comes in the book of Daniel, riding on the clouds. So Jesus did claim to be God. Jesus was a real guy. So how are we going to handle that? Well, it could be false, in which case you've got to follow a logic tree. If it was false, he either knew it was false or he didn't know it was false, meaning he was delusional. So he was either a liar or he was a lunatic. If he knew it was false, he's a liar. If he knew it was false, he's a lunatic. But if he was a liar, he was justly put to death. The execution of Jesus was righteous, because Jesus blasphemed God. Remember, the crime for which he was condemned was blasphemy. Tell us plainly, says the Sanhedrin, are you the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. Interesting answer. He said, I am. And what's their reaction? They tear their clothes, which is required in the presence of blasphemy, and said, you have heard the blasphemy. What say you? He's worthy of death. Standard court procedure for a blasphemer. So if Jesus lied, claiming to be God, and wasn't God, then he deserved his punishment by Jewish law. If he claimed to be God and didn't know that he was not God, he was just a crazy man. Those are the only explanations available. Let's go down the other branch. It's true. Jesus was God, because he claimed to be. Well, now it's on you. If he was telling the truth, you can either bow down to him as God, or you can refuse to. Those are the only options. You can't go in between. Jesus said, he's not with me, he's against me. He's not for me, he's against me. Jesus forces people to decide. You can ignore him, but that's the same thing as just saying no. Now, there is a fourth option. Ever since this was dreamed up by some apologists, it was Josh McDowell, and maybe he followed on somebody else. There is a third option, not just Lord, liar, or lunatic. There's a fourth option, and that's legend. There are those who say, well, Jesus was really just a legend. This kind of goes back to that mythical conglomeration thing. But here's the problem. A myth, historians have decided, and mythologists have decided, for a myth to emerge, you have to have at least 200 years between the events and the mythological version of the events. And myths often are based on true stories, but they embellish them and make big things out of them. They really weren't original. Well, here you run once again into that problem of all these people who were around and knew the truth about Jesus. What Jesus did didn't happen in a vacuum. He was in a society. He was with people. He was in a country. Religious people Romans. I mean, people who saw him from all kinds of angles. For that myth to emerge would have been impossible because there are too many people that knew what actually happened. That myth, had it arisen, would have never gone forward because people just shot it down. I was there. That didn't happen. We've got an abundance of confirmed evidence showing that Jesus is not a myth. We have hard physical facts of all kinds, like the Pilate stone that we saw yesterday. The guy who had Jesus crucified was a real guy. And the lives of Peter, Paul, James, and John, and the other apostles. Nobody doubts them. Nobody's going, well, Paul never existed. All these liberal scholars, oh, they're big on Paul. He's popular with them. But how they get there by saying Jesus never existed, it's twisted. I don't understand it.
Paul never wrote any of those things.
Yeah. The course of history was changed by Jesus. The history of the world was changed by Jesus, which is what you would expect if Jesus was telling the truth. Right? If Jesus was telling the truth, you would expect the world to go a completely different direction than it was going. There was no science. Christianity invented science. There were no universities. No such thing as a university. Christians invented the university. Right? We invented music. I'm not saying there was no such thing as music, but I'm saying we invented music as you know it. Did you know that Bach, a profoundly Christian man, invented the tuning system that we now all use? So music as you hear it today is a product of the Christian mind. He was saying there's got to be a better way to do this. There's order in the universe. God is a God of order. We can structure the tuning system so that you can change keys while you're playing. Prior to that, your instrument was tuned in one key. You can only play in that key. If you wanted to modulate to another key, couldn't do it. Physically impossible. There's the unfair claim that we're looking at. There's ancient histories with far less evidence for their claims than there is for Jesus. Why is nobody going around saying, well, Buddha never existed? There are no actual documents written by Buddha, and his sayings were supposedly written down by others. Okay, that's fair. But some of those guys we're not sure even existed. Did you know the Quran is said to be an assemblage of the faithful writings of his followers who are writing all this stuff? Did you know that there were several different Qurans that all contradicted each other until the time of the Caliphate of Uthman, who decided, well, this is the Quran that I like. Burn all the others. That happened. It's a fact of history. It's indisputable. But for some reason, we all go, oh, well, the Quran was written by Muhammad. Well, first of all, it wasn't written by him. Secondly, what you call the Quran is one of many Qurans. The Upanishads, the Vedas, the Kojiki, the Japanese creation myth, these things are far less established than the Christian stories. I hesitate to use the word story, the Christian records. If the same skepticism was applied to all these other religions that's applied to Christianity, if people were always running around trying to make Buddha look like one of them, the world would be very different. Let's talk about the resurrection. Because this is a sine qua non. Yeah.
Here you go there. You were saying that Christians brought science into play. And what was the other thing?
Music.
No, before music.
Oh.
Science and...
I don't know. I can't remember what I said.
Universities?
Universities. That was it. Yeah. All the Christian universities, all the universities were originally Christian, founded by Christians. If you read the charter of Harvard University, the communist, dictatorship generating university, the most politically correct institution in America, their original charter was they started their university for the purpose of creating proper Christian women and gentlemen and women to serve the country, the interests of the country. Look where they are today. So here's the big finish, because when you get to the resurrection, like if the resurrection was true, you better start taking Jesus seriously.
Right.
I'm going to listen to the guy who walked out of his grave. Okay? You all have these, heroes and religious figures and everything. None of them rose from the dead. Those mythical figures are said to have, but only because they came in touch with Christianity and they adopted our story. With the exception of someone, it's not even really what happened. They just kind of, certain critics reworded to make it look like that's what happened. So if Jesus claimed to be God, he did, and he was raised from the dead, then people who don't believe in Jesus have a real problem. They're running away from something very important. So I'm going to defer to my teacher, Dr. Gary Habermas. He's a wonderful guy. He's one of my professors, and he has done something great. He's created what's called the minimal facts argument. The minimal facts argument. What he does is he takes the facts that are accepted by the critics of Christianity, the people who don't believe the Bible. But they do recognize that there's a history here. The historical facts that they accept. He calls that the minimal facts. And then he uses those facts to prove his point. It's a brilliant move, and it has been very successful. In fact, he teaches at Liberty University, and every year he challenges his students to assemble these facts. You're given these facts. You have to use these facts to establish an outcome, a true outcome that is not consistent with the Christian Gospels. I don't know how many hundreds of students have passed through that. Nobody's ever succeeded. So, he's using their own criteria. Skeptics, the critics. He's using what's called multiple independent attestation. This is a feature of good history. You use multiple sources coming from different points of view. 3 sources all from the same point of view, okay, but if they're all coming from different points of view, you've got a matrix all pointing to the same truth. They may see things a little differently. You'd expect that the nucleus of truth is there. Using 130 Christian and non-Christian sources, all of them agree on the essential claims of the gospel. Now, they don't say Jesus rose from the dead. They will say the apostles believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Good enough, because you're citing an eyewitness testimony, okay, who died for his belief. 95% of all scholars accept these facts. Even the ones who he hasn't quoted have come on board and said, yep, this is all historically confirmed. I'm not talking about the existence of Jesus now. We're talking about the resurrection. From 1 Corinthians 15:3, which was dated to a period of about 54 to 57 AD. The eyewitnesses were still alive at the time. Paul preached it in Corinth in 51 AD, or Paul preached in Corinth. Paul was in Jerusalem in 35 AD, and the disciples believed they saw Jesus the risen Lord. Those are all components of this argument. There's a lot more of it. Those are just some of them. Now, we already know that liars make lousy liars. I mean, martyrs make lousy liars. Because you will die for something you believe in, you will not die for something you know is a lie. Very, very few people would ever do that. I don't think anybody would. Why would you? I know I'm about to be killed, and all I have to do is admit that I was wrong, or I was lying, and they're going to let me live. Most people choose to lie. All of the martyrs, all of the apostles died as remaining faithful to what they knew to be true. All of the apostles were skeptics. Thomas, the doubter, Philip, show us the Father. She's like, I've been here with you all this time, and you still don't get it, right? They were questioning him all the time. They were just mindlessly following. Read the Gospels and notice how much criticism and questioning that the apostles heap up on Jesus. They weren't quite sure what was going on, even after Jesus was crucified and rose again, even after he told them that was what was going to happen. They still didn't get it. We have the benefit of history. We can look back and go, oh, you silly apostles. Paul was the ultimate skeptic. He was out killing Christians. regarding them as liars and phonies and fakers and heretics and frauds that are destroying Judaism, turning the world upside down. He was pretty skeptical. What happened to him? He wrote 2/3 of the books of the New Testament. He became the largest progenitor of Christianity in Christian history, or at least early Christian history. Something happened on that road to Damascus. He didn't do that because he thought it would be a good idea. He lost everything. He was in the Sanhedrin. He was the upper crust of Jewish society. He abandoned it. That which I counted as gain, lost. I counted it all but dung, he says, and moved on following Jesus. All of the apostles were martyred. We touched on that. And untold thousands of others were martyred, including people who, like the apostles, had been around in the time of Jesus, who had been eyewitnesses to the things that they had seen and were recorded in the Gospels. When you put it all together, you've got a body of evidence. And if you try to take those, and I'm just picking some representatives here. Remember, there's 130 points. I don't have that much time. I'm just picking some of them. If you put them together and then try to use those facts to explain this away in some way that is different from the Christian gospel, you will fail. Nobody's ever been able to do it. It's the minimal facts argument. It's sound as a rock and remains basically unchallenged. Nobody's ever been able to crack that nut. The myth theories, we talked about the swoon theory, which is the Islamic theory, that Jesus didn't really die, he just passed out on the cross. This is a guy who was beat to a pulp, hung out on a cross, bled out, stabbed in through the side with a big spear, still stayed up there for a while, dead. Roman soldiers who were experts in knowing what a dead guy looked like. They knew when somebody was dead. They were mass murderers. They seemed to think he was dead because they put him in his grave. He stayed in his grave for 3 days. In the swoon theory, but the moisture and the coolness of the cave revived him. Back when I was a kid, there was a book that came out called The Passover Plot. You know, if you alliterate something, Passover Plot, it makes it sound so much more authentic and believable, right? Passover Plot. Jesus was taken down off the cross. Body was stolen early on by the apostles, who took him out in the desert, buried him in a shallow grave. He was dug up and eaten by wild dogs. Show me the facts that lead to that conclusion. No, there's no facts. There's nothing. Nothing. It's just fantasy. But people take that stuff seriously. Why? Because they want to. It gives them an excuse to reject Jesus. See, they don't have a problem with the intellectual side. They have a problem with being able to tell the difference between what they want to believe and what they don't want to. Swoon theories, the conspiracy theories, various versions of the body was stolen. That's the Passover Plot was one of those. And 100% of all these alternative theories failed. None of them are supported by first century evidence. None of them. All of them are supported only by speculation. And then later centuries, speculations by other people who were dead, who were doing this after the time of Christ, and all those people were dead. One of my favorites, none of them can withstand a high level of scrutiny that's applied to the sources backing historically Orthodox Christianity. In other words, our story has been scrutinized so thoroughly and still stands. None of them have even been scrutinized yet. They sort of are. There's this sort of passive gesture, like, well, we'll look into that, and they kind of look into it a little bit, but these things never survive in scholarly circles. Nobody actually believes these things. The Muslims believe the myth, the swoon theory. Right. So we come back to this conclusion. If Jesus claimed to be God and was raised from the dead, well, we have confirmed pretty much that really everything Jesus said was true. You got a guy who walked out of the grave, who claimed to be God, said a bunch of really cool stuff that the world lives by, even if they don't believe in Jesus. They still accept a lot of the morality. They imitate it. The Buddhists make him theirs. Krishnas make him theirs. The Aetherians make him theirs. They're all trying to glom onto it. It means they validate. It validates them. They validate it. They're accepting it. But they're trying to twist it to make it like, well, we don't have to change. We got the real deal. But none of their claims have been scrutinized. Our claims have been thoroughly scrutinized for hundreds and really thousands of years now. And they're still standing. The tomb is still empty. You can go there today. Still empty. Jesus was resurrected. Jesus claimed to be God, and he was resurrected. Jesus is probably God. So, that's a lot of me. If you guys have any questions, I'm available now and later. But I think we're probably out of time.
I'm good. I'm good.
I gotta go get my fish.
It's 5:26.
Yeah, it's
Thank
time.
you.
Yeah, it's time to get going then. Well, thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah.
I'd like to pray us out then. And next Saturday, we'll meet back in the cafe. We actually have the electronics set up to be more successful. There's several more that have said that they're going to be there. What are the next things that we might be covering?
Right, so I want to show you that.
Was that on that sheet that you just gave us last week?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have that.
Okay.
Where is it?
Cool.
There it is. I'll just put it up
Same
again.
time, same time as this week for the
Yes.
Saturday, and then Sunday from what,
2
2 to 4 or something, 2 to
Yeah.
5?
to we're done.
Yeah,
5.
yeah, whatever.
Okay, so what we're going to be doing next week is up on the screen. So we're going to do a brief survey of worldviews, really kind of concentrating a little bit on religious worldviews, but also others,
Okay.
because we're going to get a lot of secular worldview after that. We're going to talk about the nature of truth,
Okay.
and then we're going to go into deconstructing worldviews. And most of this stuff is based on Piercy, your book
Right.
by Nancy Piercy. And then finally, we're going to do a piece on cults and world religions. Very, very brief, really, because that's a big subject. We're only going to have a certain amount of time. We're just going to skim through it. And then the following week, I'm going to do a lecture on common objections. These are the most common objections that people have against Christianity. Like, you know,
Why is your God the right God or something?
yeah, stuff like that. Why is there evil? If God is a loving God, why is there evil?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. And then after that, we're going to do tactics review. We're going to go through some tactics. We're going to get a little logic, a little more specific about logical argumentation. And then we're going to concentrate on tactical exercises.
Cool. Yeah.
And in order to do that, we have to have more people.
Yeah.
Because you have to have, at least a couple of pairs of people.
Well, it's a lot to absorb, but it's very awesome too.
Yeah.
It is.
This normally takes like roughly 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And we're packing it down into less. We're packing into like 6 days.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, and it's great. I mean, it's really, really good. And reading the books is, very enlightening. The finding truth kind of annoys me because it's just like reading about other religions and philosophies that all deny Christ, how they all commit suicide at the end anyway. So it's like, it just was like, I don't want to read any more of this.